I sent one single photo to our family group chat. It was my 6-year-old daughter, pale and hooked up to machines after life-saving open-heart surgery. I wrote, "She wants to see you." My brother texted back, "Busy, handle it." My mother added, "She lived, stop making her our problem." I replied, "It is okay, but at 9 p.m., what they saw broadcast live on the evening news made them drop their phones in sheer panic." My name is Hazel, 33 years old, and my family had no idea that I was the one pulling the strings. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the pediatric intensive care unit at Chicago Medical Center. I sat in a plastic chair that had been my bed for the past 48 hours, watching the steady rise and fall of Lily's small chest. She looked so fragile, wrapped in a tangle of wires and tubes, but she was breathing. The surgeon had just left the room after confirming that the valve repair was a complete success. For the first time in months, the crushing weight of terror had lifted off my shoulders. I wanted to share that relief. I wanted the people who shared my blood to feel the same profound gratitude that was bringing tears to my tired eyes. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of Lily sleeping peacefully. I opened the group chat labeled Family, which consisted of my mother Patricia, my father Gregory, and my younger brother Liam. I attached the photo and typed a simple message. "The surgery was a success. She is asking for you. She wants to see you." I watched the red receipts appear almost instantly. I waited, holding my breath, expecting a call or at least a flurry of relieved messages. Instead, my screen lit up with a text from Liam. "Busy tonight. Handle it yourself." Before I could even process the sting of his words, a second message popped up, this time from my mother. "She lived, Hazel. Stop making her our problem and let us enjoy our evening." I stared at the glowing screen as a cold numbness washed over me. I opened Instagram, and the algorithm immediately fed me the truth of what was so important. Liam had posted a live story just minutes ago. The video showed a lavish ballroom at a downtown luxury hotel. He was wearing a bespoke tuxedo, holding a glass of vintage champagne, and laughing with a group of Chicago real estate elites. My mother Patricia was standing right beside him, draped in diamonds, posing for the cameras. They were hosting the annual fundraising gala for Liam Charitable Foundation, a high society event designed entirely to stroke his ego and elevate our family's social standing. The betrayal cut deep, but it was a familiar kind of pain. This was exactly who they had always been. As I sat there in the sterile glow of the hospital room, a memory from 15 years ago surfaced with perfect clarity. I was 18 years old, burning with a fever of 104 degrees. I could barely lift my head off the pillow. I had begged my mother to take me to the emergency room because I could not stop shivering. Instead, Patricia had tossed a plastic bottle of cheap painkillers onto my bed while buttoning up her designer coat. She told me to stop being dramatic because Liam had an audition for a high school rock band and he needed his mother there for moral support. She left me alone in the house for 8 hours. I had ended up calling an ambulance for myself. That was the defining rule of our family. Liam was the golden child, the heir apparent, the genius developer. I was just the disappointment. That dynamic only worsened after I married Kevin. 6 years ago, when Lily was born with a severe congenital heart defect, Kevin packed his bags and walked out, claiming he could not handle the stress of raising a sick child. My family did not comfort me. My father Gregory told me I had brought shame to the family by failing to keep my husband. They treated Lily's condition as an embarrassing inconvenience and kept their distance whenever the reality of her illness threatened their perfect image. What none of them knew, what nobody in that glittering ballroom could possibly fathom, was that being abandoned had been the greatest catalyst of my life. When Kevin left and my family turned their backs, I did not crumble. I used my anger as fuel. Over the past 4 years, I had built a company from the ground up. I was the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Horizon. On paper, we were a corporate consulting firm. In reality, we were the ultimate crisis management and debt acquisition syndicate for the Chicago elite. We handled the scandals, the bankruptcies, and the toxic assets of the ultra-wealthy. We bought up bad debt, restructured it, and held immense power over some of the most influential people in the city. I had amassed a quiet, invisible fortune. I drove a modest car to family dinners and lived in a quiet neighborhood specifically to keep my family in the dark. They wanted to see me as a struggling single mother working a mediocre administrative job because it made them feel superior. I let them believe it because I knew that if they ever discovered my true net worth, their contempt would immediately turn into parasitic greed. But looking at the callous text messages on my screen, the last thread of my familial loyalty snapped. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They had looked at my child fighting for her life and called her a problem. I wiped the stray tears from my cheeks. My sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating rage. I opened the group chat and typed a 2-word response. It is okay. I set my personal phone face down on the bedside table. I reached into my purse and pulled out a heavy, encrypted black phone, the one I strictly used for Apex Horizon business. I dialed the direct line to my chief operating officer, Mason. He answered on the first ring. Boss, is everything all right with Lily? She is perfectly fine, Mason. The surgery was a total success. I kept my voice low so I would not wake her, but my tone was laced with absolute steel. That is incredible news, Hazel. Take all the time you need. We have the fort held down here. I am not taking time off, I replied. I need you to initiate Protocol B immediately. It is time for Liam Party to make the 9 p.m. news. Are you absolutely sure, Hazel? This is the nuclear option. There is no coming back from this. I looked at my daughter, pale, sleeping face, and then at the text message from my mother. I am entirely sure. Burn his empire to the ground. Understood. Consider it done. I hung up the secure phone and pulled my tablet out of my bag. I logged into the local news network live feed and set it on my lap. The digital clock in the corner of the screen read 8:45 p.m. I had 15 minutes to wait. I spent those 15 minutes holding Lily's small hand, listening to the rhythmic reassurance of her heartbeat. I thought about the sheer arrogance of my brother. Liam had built his real estate development firm on aggressive expansion, leveraging massive loans that our father had co-signed. He used his charitable foundation as a shiny facade to attract high-net-worth investors, hosting galas like the one tonight to project an image of infallible success. But Apex Horizon knew the truth. We knew that his charity was nothing more than a sophisticated money laundering front designed to funnel untaxed capital into his failing commercial projects. We also knew that he had defaulted on the massive loan for his flagship commercial skyscraper in the Loop. At 8:58 p.m., I watched the live stream of the gala that one of Liam's guests was broadcasting on social media. Liam was standing on the grand stage, bathed in spotlight, gripping a microphone. Behind him, massive digital projection screens displayed the logo of his charity. He was in the middle of a self-congratulatory speech, talking about the importance of community and giving back to the less fortunate. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. I could see Patricia in the front row, wiping away a fake tear of pride, playing the role of the perfect supportive mother. The clock struck 9. Because Liam had sold the gala as a televised charity event, the ballroom screens were already linked to the local network feed. At 9, the scheduled program was interrupted by a verified investigative report. His promotional video vanished, the anchor filled the screens, and the ballroom speakers carried the breaking bulletin. Liam stopped talking, tapping his microphone in confusion. The guests murmured, looking up at the towering screens. A prominent local anchor appeared on the screens. "We interrupt our regular programming with a developing investigation," she said. "Federal authorities have received bank records and sworn source material concerning one of Chicago's most prominent philanthropic organizations. The inquiry is examining whether charitable donations were diverted into failing commercial real estate projects." A split screen appeared, showing Liam's face next to the logo of his charity. Documents authenticated by the network's investigative team indicate that millions in charitable donations moved through shell entities tied to Liam's commercial projects. The anchor emphasized that the records had been provided to investigators and that the foundation and its officers would be given an opportunity to respond. The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. On the live stream, I watched investors drop their champagne glasses. Board members immediately turned their backs and began speed-walking toward the exit doors, desperate to distance themselves from a federal scandal. Liam stood frozen on the stage, his smug confidence entirely shattered, his face draining of all color. But the anchor was not finished. The anchor then displayed Liam's flagship Loop skyscraper. The mortgage had been in default for months. Apex Horizon had purchased the distressed note, completed the required notices, and obtained appointment of a receiver while foreclosure proceeded. Liam still held title for the moment, but he had lost control of the building's rents and operations. The camera panned to Patricia. The queen of Chicago society looked like she had just been struck by lightning. She was clutching her diamond necklace, looking around wildly as the socialites and wealthy friends she had spent decades trying to impress began whispering and pointing at her. The humiliation was instantaneous and absolute. The life they had built on appearances was crumbling in real time, on live television. I watched the screen fade to black as the guest holding the phone abruptly ended their live stream. 2 minutes later, my personal phone began to vibrate violently across the bedside table. The caller ID flashed in bold letters. Mom. I let it ring 3 times before I picked it up. I did not say hello. Hazel. Patricia was screaming so loudly the audio distorted. The background noise sounded like a stampede. Her voice was pure frantic hysteria. "Are you watching the news? Did you see what is happening? It is a disaster! It is a complete disaster! Liam is ruined. The investors are leaving. The police are probably on their way." I kept my voice completely level, perfectly calm. "Why are you calling me mother? You work in marketing, or communications, or whatever it is you do." Patricia shrieked her panic, blinding her to her own condescension. "You have to call your boss. You have to find someone who knows someone at the news station. Tell them it is a mistake. You have to fix this. Do you hear me? What kind of curse did you bring upon your brother tonight? What the hell did you just do?" I reached out and gently stroked my daughter's warm cheek. I listened to the desperate, terrified breathing of the woman who had abandoned us. "I am not doing anything, Mother," I replied, my voice cold enough to freeze water. "I am just cleaning up a problem, exactly like you asked." I hung up the phone and turned it off completely. The real battle was just beginning, but tonight, my daughter was safe, and the empire of lies was officially burning. Morning arrived with a gentle stillness. The sun filtered through the horizontal blinds of the pediatric intensive care unit, casting thin stripes of warm light across the sterile floor. Lily was resting comfortably. The rhythmic beeping of her heart monitor was strong and steady, a beautiful testament to her resilience. I sat beside her, sipping a terrible cup of cafeteria coffee, feeling more at peace than I had in months. The crisis of the surgery was over. Now it was just about healing. That fragile peace shattered instantly. The heavy wooden door to our private hospital room flew open with such violent force that the handle dented the drywall. Patricia and Liam stormed inside. They looked like the tragic survivors of a shipwreck, if the shipwreck was a luxury yacht. Patricia was still wearing her diamond necklace, but her designer evening gown was severely wrinkled and her mascara was smeared beneath her eyes. Liam looked completely unhinged. His expensive tuxedo jacket was missing his bow tie, hung loosely around his neck, and his eyes were bloodshot with manic desperation. Neither of them even glanced at the hospital bed. They did not look at the 6-year-old girl lying there with a fresh incision running down her chest. Their eyes were locked entirely on me. "You need to fix this right now!" Patricia shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at my face. She did not bother to lower her voice completely, ignoring the intensive care environment. "Did you see the news? Did you see what they did to your brother?" I stood up immediately, placing my body between them and my daughter's bed. "Keep your voices down. Lily is sleeping and you are in a hospital." Liam shoved past his mother, invading my personal space. The smell of stale alcohol and pure panic radiated off him. "I do not care about her nap schedule, Hazel. My entire life is going up in flames. The feds are already outside my office building. My investors have blocked my numbers. You work in public relations. You know reporters. You know the editors at these garbage news stations. I want you to march into your office this morning, beg your bosses, use every contact you have, and force them to issue a public retraction. Tell them the documents were fabricated by a disgruntled employee. You owe this family," Patricia hissed, stepping forward to flank her golden child. "We are in the middle of a catastrophe. Liam's reputation is on the line. The banks are going to call in his loans. You are going to get on your phone, and you are going to call your agency, and you will not stop working until his name is cleared. It is your duty to protect your brother." My duty. The word tasted like poison. It took me straight back to the summer I turned 22. Liam was just a sophomore in college already, playing the role of a high-rolling playboy. He had spent his entire academic year throwing illicit parties, gambling, and racking up a staggering $80,000 debt with a group of extremely dangerous, unsavory underground lenders. When the collectors came knocking at our family home, threatening violence, Patricia did not punish her golden boy. She did not make him face the consequences of his reckless arrogance. Instead, she cornered me in our kitchen. She slammed a stack of credit card applications and personal loan documents onto the dining table. She forced me to open multiple lines of credit in my own name to pay off his mess. She looked me dead in the eye and told me it was my duty to protect the family honor. Liam, she had said, had a brilliant, lucrative future ahead of him. A criminal record or broken kneecaps would ruin his destiny. But me? I was just ordinary. A ruined credit score would not matter for a plain girl who was only destined for middle management. I spent the next 5 years of my life eating cheap noodles, working 3 exhausting jobs, and dodging collection calls to pay off a massive debt I never incurred, all while Liam drove a brand new sports car purchased by our father. I looked at Patricia, demanding tear-stained face. "I do not owe you a single thing," I said. My voice barely above a whisper, yet sharp enough to slice through their hysteria. "And it is incredibly telling that neither of you has even bothered to look at Lily since you barged in here." Liam sneered, rolling his eyes, as if my daughter open-heart surgery was a minor traffic delay. "Forget the kid, Hazel. She is fine, she is breathing, whatever. My life is ruined. If you do not get on your phone right now and fix this media nightmare, I swear to God." I did not let him finish his pathetic threat. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my secure black phone. "You want me to fix the media nightmare, Liam. You want me to tell the reporters that the financial documents showing you embezzling charity funds were completely fabricated." "Yes!" he shouted, throwing his hands in the air. "Tell them it is a lie!" "But it is not a lie, is it?" I tapped the screen of my phone, opening an encrypted audio file. I pressed play and held up the phone. The audio was clear because one participant in Liam's private lunch had recorded the conversation with his own consent and delivered the original file through counsel. Its device record metadata and unedited source had already been preserved. Liam's own arrogant voice filled the room. "Move the gala donations through the offshore shell account," he said. "The children's charity is a gold mine. Nobody audits building permits when you put a sick child on the brochure. We use the foundation money to cover the loop interest and replace it after the next capital raise." The recording stopped. The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. Liam's jaw went completely slack. The remaining color drained entirely from Patricia's face, leaving her looking hollow and terrified. They stared at my phone as if it were a loaded weapon pointed directly at their chests. "Where did you get that?" Liam whispered, his voice trembling with a new profound kind of fear. "How do you have that?" "You have always been careless, Liam," I said, slipping the phone back into my pocket. The journalists did not receive a rumor. They received authenticated records and a recording supplied by someone who was present. There would be no honest retraction because the evidence was preserved outside my control and already in the hands of counsel and investigators. Patricia lunged forward, her hands outstretched as if she could physically snatch the digital file from my pocket. "Give me that phone. You delete that right now, Hazel. You are destroying your own flesh and blood." I did not step back. I pressed the red emergency button on the wall panel behind me. 2 hospital security guards, who had already been alerted by the nurses due to the initial shouting, stepped into the room immediately. "These 2 individuals are harassing a pediatric patient," I told the guards, my voice perfectly calm and authoritative. "Please escort them off the hospital premises immediately. They are no longer welcome on this floor." The guards did not hesitate. They moved in, grabbing Liam by the arms. He thrashed against them, his panic morphing into a feral, ugly rage. Patricia tried to swat the guards away, crying and screaming about calling the police, completely oblivious to the irony of her threats. As they dragged him backward through the heavy wooden door, Liam fought to keep his eyes locked on mine. His face twisted into a mask of pure, venomous hatred. "You will pay for this, Hazel!" he spat, his voice echoing down the sterile hospital hallway for everyone to hear. "You think you have won. You are nothing. I will call the bank right now. I will freeze every single account you have ever used. I will cut off your livelihood, and I will make sure you do not have a single dime to pay for that brat medical bills. You will be begging me on the street by noon." The morning ticked away into a quiet and peaceful afternoon. I stayed right by the hospital bed, watching Lily breathe. The color was finally starting to return to her small cheeks, replacing the terrifying grayish pallor that had haunted me for weeks. Every steady beep of the heart monitor was a victory song. I had spent the last 4 years fighting tooth and nail to ensure that my daughter would never become a victim of the circumstances my family and my ex-husband had abandoned us in. Sitting there, in the quiet room, I knew I had succeeded. Around noon, a soft knock broke the silence. A young nurse with a sympathetic smile peeked her head around the heavy wooden door. She kept her voice to a gentle whisper. "Excuse me, Hazel. The financial coordinator asked if you could step down to the billing department on the first floor. There seems to be a minor issue with the payment authorization for the surgical suite." I thanked her and gently kissed my daughter's forehead before stepping out into the sterile, brightly lit hallway. I knew exactly what this was about. Liam had made a threat, and like a predictable, spoiled child, he was throwing a tantrum with the only weapon he knew how to use: money. I pushed open the frosted glass door to the billing coordinator office. Sitting behind a large oak desk was a nervous-looking hospital administrator holding a stack of invoices. But she was not alone. Lounging in a leather guest chair with his legs crossed at the ankle was a man I recognized instantly. His name was Richard Caldwell. He was the senior corporate attorney for my father's real estate development firm and Liam's personal legal attack dog. Caldwell was a man who made his living intimidating contractors and bullying small business owners out of their properties. He wore a sharp charcoal suit that cost more than most people made in a month, and he wore a smug, self-satisfied grin that made my stomach turn. "Hazel," he said, standing up and adjusting his expensive silk tie. "It has been a long time. You are looking well, considering the circumstances." I ignored his outstretched hand and turned my attention entirely to the administrator. "You asked to see me about the billing authorization?" The administrator cleared her throat. The old credit line listed for optional amenities had just been suspended, she explained. The outstanding balance for the private recovery suite upgraded nursing coverage and out-of-network specialists was $150,000. Lily's medically necessary post-operative treatment would continue, regardless of payment. Only the optional VIP arrangements required a new authorization to remain active. I nodded slowly, feeling Caldwell's eyes burning into the side of my head. The suspended account was a legacy credit line Gregory had opened when I was 19, back when they still pretended to care about me. Because he remained a guarantor, the lender paused new charges after the family company withdrew its support. When I started Apex Horizon 4 years ago, I kept that one account as a decoy. I used it for groceries and utilities so my family could monitor ordinary spending and believe I was barely surviving, while every genuine business and personal asset remained legally separate behind Apex Horizon. Now Liam had used his executive power at the family company to freeze it, thinking he was cutting off my oxygen supply. Caldwell took a deliberate step forward, inserting himself into the conversation. He looked down at me with an expression of profound, manufactured pity. "This is a very unfortunate situation, Hazel. $150,000 is a staggering amount of money for a single mother to produce on such short notice. I cannot even imagine the stress you must be under right now, with a sick child upstairs and collection agencies looming." I kept my face perfectly blank. "What are you doing here, Caldwell?" "I am here as an emissary for your brother," he replied, slipping his hands into his trouser pockets. "Liam is understandably devastated by the media circus you maliciously orchestrated last night. His investors are panicking. The banks are breathing down his neck. However, Liam is a forgiving man. He understands that grief and financial desperation can make a woman act irrationally." He leaned closer and lowered his voice. "Liam would restore the guarantee pay the private suite balance and establish a college fund for Lily if I issued a public statement calling the investigative records fabricated. I would have to claim that grief made me unstable and that I had lied to punish him. He presented extortion as forgiveness and expected me to thank him for the privilege." I stared at him, letting the absolute absurdity of his proposition hang in the quiet office. He truly believed he had me backed into a corner. He looked at me and saw the scared, 22-year-old girl who used to cry when her mother yelled at her. He saw the abandoned wife who could not afford rent 4 years ago. He did not see the predator standing right in front of him. "If I refused," the attorney continued, "the luxury accommodations would end, and the balance would follow me into collections." Then he falsely implied Lily could be transferred. The administrator immediately corrected him. No medically unsafe transfer would occur for financial reasons, and the treating physicians controlled all post-operative decisions. His threat concerned debt and optional services, not the care keeping my daughter alive. I turned away from his smug face and looked at the billing administrator. She was watching the exchange with wide, terrified eyes, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. "Do you have a secure card reader?" I asked her, my voice perfectly even and entirely devoid of panic. She blinked in confusion. "Yes, ma'am?" I reached into a concealed pocket of my handbag and pulled out a matte black titanium Centurion card tied to Apex Horizon's executive account. It was heavy and almost unadorned except for the embedded chip and my legal name. The issuer's secure terminal, not decorative lettering on the card, would identify the corporate account and my spending authority. I placed the heavy metal card onto the glass surface of her desk. The distinct clink of the titanium echoed in the quiet room. Process the full $150,000, I instructed her smoothly. And while you are at it, please prepay the account for an additional $50,000 to cover any incidental therapeutic treatments Lily might require over the next 2 weeks. I do not want to be interrupted by administrative matters again. The billing coordinator stared at the black metal card like it was an alien artifact. She carefully picked it up, her hands trembling slightly, and inserted it into the secure terminal. Caldwell's smug grin evaporated instantly. His brow furrowed in deep confusion. He took a step closer, squinting at the terminal as if his eyes were deceiving him. "Hazel, what kind of game are you playing?" he demanded. "Whose credit card did you just steal? That is a criminal offense. I will call the police right now and have you arrested for fraud." I did not answer him. I just smiled, a slow, cold smile of absolute pity. The terminal beeped, approving the full $200,000 transaction. The receipt printer produced a confirmation showing that the patient account and optional recovery services were fully funded. The administrator reminded everyone in the room that Lily's essential clinical care had never depended on the payment. The administrator returned the receipt and the titanium card. Her tone shifted from concern to professional respect. "Thank you, Ms. Hazel. The private recovery arrangements and rehabilitation reserve are settled. Your daughter's medical team will continue making every clinical decision independently." I took the card. The attorney's eyes moved from my name to the secure account confirmation still glowing on the terminal. I watched the exact moment he understood that the card was mine and that the authorized corporate account belonged to Apex Horizon. Hazel, Chief Executive Officer, Apex Horizon. The color drained out of Caldwell's face so fast he looked like he might actually pass out on the hospital floor. His eyes widened in absolute horror. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The arrogant corporate shark was suddenly reduced to a stammering, breathless mess. "Apex Horizon," he whispered, stepping backward as if I had just pulled a live grenade out of my purse. You are the one who bought the debt. You are the one who seized the skyscraper." I slipped the titanium card back into my bag and snapped the clasp shut. It is truly remarkable, Caldwell, how blind arrogant men can be when they underestimate a woman they deem ordinary. You can run back to Liam now. Tell him his little tactic with the credit line was adorable. Tell him I said, "Good luck with the federal indictment." Caldwell was literally shaking. He bumped into the guest chair, unable to tear his eyes away from me. He had come here to bully a struggling single mother into submission, and instead, he had just threatened the ruthless billionaire who currently held the deed to his boss' entire real estate empire. Before Caldwell could even attempt to formulate a coherent response, the heavy frosted glass door to the billing office swung wide open. Before the attorney could formulate a response, the hospital's chief medical director entered the billing office. He was a senior physician who usually met donors and board members in scheduled settings, but the finance team had told him I was downstairs, and he wanted to thank me personally. Dr. Harrison bypassed the trembling lawyer completely, acting as if Caldwell was nothing more than a piece of uninteresting furniture. He walked straight up to me, stopping at a respectful distance, and offered a deep, gracious bow. "Miss Hazel, the director said I wanted to thank you for the $5 million contribution to pediatric cardiology. The gift was made through a donor-advised vehicle and will remain anonymous to the public, but hospital compliance verified the source before accepting it. Your support will fund surgical access and post-operative care for children whose families cannot afford it." He shook my hand, and I thanked him for the care his surgical team had given Lily. I asked that the doctors and nurses receive the credit. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched the family attorney retreat into the hallway, pull out his phone, and hurry toward the exit to warn Liam that the financial hostage tactic had failed completely. The director confirmed that Lily's treatment plan would be based entirely on medical judgment, and that her private recovery arrangements were funded for as long as the physicians considered them useful. I returned to the pediatric floor, expecting the quiet rhythm of medical machines and the sight of my resting child. Instead, I found Kevin, the ghost from my past, standing directly outside her room. Instead, I found a ghost from my past standing directly outside Lily's private room. It was Kevin, my ex-husband. 6 years ago, after learning that our newborn daughter had a congenital heart defect, he packed his bags in the middle of the night and disappeared. He claimed that raising a sick child would damage his mental health and his career. He had not attended one cardiology appointment, sent one birthday card, or asked whether Lily survived the operations that followed. Now he was standing in the hospital corridor, wearing a cheap tailored suit and trying to look like a deeply concerned father. He was arguing with the floor charge nurse, demanding immediate entry into the private suite. I stopped dead in my tracks. The sheer audacity of his presence made the blood roar in my ears. Patricia had truly scraped the bottom of the barrel. Realizing that freezing my credit line had failed, she had resorted to the ultimate dirty trick. She had dug up the one person who could legally complicate my life, and likely promised him a massive payout from the family company to do her bidding. "What are you doing here, Kevin?" I asked, my voice sliced through the corridor crisp and freezing. Kevin spun around. He instantly pasted on a look of manufactured outrage, attempting to play the role of the devoted patriarch for the benefit of the nursing staff. "Hazel," he sighed loudly, shaking his head. "Thank God I finally tracked you down. I received a highly concerning phone call from your mother this morning. She told me you are acting completely erratically. She said you are making dangerous medical decisions for our daughter and refusing to listen to reason." "Our daughter," I repeated, taking one deliberate step toward him. "You lost the right to use those words 6 years ago, when you ran because her medical bills frightened you. Get away from her door before hospital security removes you." Kevin puffed out his chest and claimed biology gave him legal authority. He said Patricia had told him I was keeping Lily in an expensive private suite and making reckless decisions. He demanded paperwork for a transfer to a cheaper public hospital and announced that he intended to override me as her father, even though he had not participated in her care for 6 years. I stared at him, letting the absolute cruelty of his demand sink in. Lily had just survived open heart surgery. Her chest was literally stitched together. Moving her to an underfunded public facility, riding in a bumpy ambulance across the city simply to save money was a death sentence. It carried massive risks of infection and heart failure. Kevin did not care. Patricia did not care. They were willing to risk my 6-year-old life just to force me to issue a public apology for Liam. The charge nurse looked to me for the governing custody order. She explained that Lily's medically necessary treatment would continue and that no transfer would occur without physician approval. If 2 adults genuinely shared decision-making authority, however, the hospital would preserve the current plan, while counsel confirmed the controlling judgment. Kevin crossed his arms and claimed joint medical custody. He repeated Liam's bargain, clear the family name, and the transfer dispute would disappear. Refuse, and he would create enough legal conflict to delay every non-emergency decision and turn Lily's recovery into a courtroom battle. He called that doing the right thing for our child. He thought he had me checkmated. He thought his sudden reappearance had paralyzed me. I did not scream. I did not cry. I calmly unzipped my leather handbag and reached into the hidden zippered compartment where I kept my most vital documents. As the chief executive officer of a crisis management firm, I never traveled anywhere without my personal legal armor. I pulled a certified Cook County judgment from my bag and pressed the heavy papers against his chest. "Read the second page, Kevin," I said. "Read the paragraph governing medical decisions and the obligations you accepted 6 years ago." The order was 6 years old. It had been entered after Kevin refused to participate in Lily's care and asked to disappear from our daily lives. It did not erase him from the law or release him from child support. The judgment awarded me sole responsibility for Lily's healthcare decisions, recorded Kevin's waiver of parenting time, and preserved his support obligation. He had never been erased from a birth certificate, and he had never been permitted to purchase freedom from support. He had simply abandoned every responsibility the court left him, while arrears accumulated behind him. "You have no medical decision-making authority," I told him loudly enough for the nurse to hear. "Your unpaid support does not buy new rights, and your biological connection does not override the judgment. You cannot order a transfer, cancel treatment, or sign a discharge request." The charge nurse reviewed the certified copy, documented it in Lily's chart, and confirmed that the treating team would follow my decisions and the existing post-operative plan unless a valid, later court order required something different. I pointed toward the elevator. "Patricia sent a ghost to fight her war, Kevin. Leave this floor. Call your lawyer if you believe the judgment changed, and do not approach Lily again without lawful authorization." I expected him to crumble. I expected him to drop the papers and run, just like he did 4 years ago. Instead of leaving, Kevin smiled and tossed the custody judgment onto a chair. He reached into his jacket and produced a stamped emergency filing obtained that morning, certain that one new piece of paper had erased 6 years of court history. "You always were overconfident," he said. The family attorney anticipated the custody order. Patricia and Liam filed an emergency petition claiming unexplained spending, emotional instability, and danger to Lily, while deliberately omitting that I was Apex Horizon's CEO. The first page carried the clerk's stamp and the judge's signature. It was a temporary ex parte order, scheduling an immediate hearing and directing the hospital to preserve Lily's current post-operative placement until the court could review the allegations. Attached behind it was an unsigned proposed order naming Kevin as an interim co-decision maker. He held the 2 pages together and called the entire packet an injunction, hoping no one would notice that the judge had signed only the status quo order. The petition alleged that my sudden use of an expensive card and the public scandal proved a mental breakdown. It contained no independent psychological evaluation, no affidavit from Lily's physicians, and no disclosure of Kevin's years of absence. Those omissions made the filing dangerous, but also vulnerable. Kevin claimed the court had suspended my parental rights for 24 hours. The signed language did no such thing. It preserved the current placement, set a prompt hearing, and prohibited either side from making a non-emergency transfer without medical approval and further court review. He still pointed at himself and announced that he was the temporary proxy, relying on the unsigned page, as though confidence could convert a proposal into a judicial command. I read the packet twice. The real order could create administrative delay, but it did not authorize anyone to touch Lily, remove her from the hospital, or override the treating cardiologist. Kevin's power existed only in the story he was telling the hallway. Kevin said an ambulance was already coming and demanded a public apology for Liam. The charge nurse called hospital counsel, who confirmed that no transfer would occur without physician approval and a valid directive. His ultimatum was a bluff, built around a genuine filing and a false description of its effect. The sterile air of the hospital corridor seemed to freeze. The charge nurse gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Kevin stood there holding the municipal court injunction like a winning lottery ticket. He looked so incredibly proud of himself. He had finally found a way to hurt me, to exert the ultimate control over the child he had completely abandoned. Patricia stepped out from the shadow of the elevator bank where she had been hiding. She walked up to stand beside Kevin, her designer heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. She crossed her arms and offered me a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. "We told you to fix the problem, Hazel," my mother sneered, her voice dripping with venom. You thought you could throw your own brother to the wolves and just walk away. You thought you could disrespect this family? Well, now you are going to learn how the real world works. Call your media contacts, clear his name, or we pack your little girl up and ship her off to the worst public clinic in the city. I looked at the emergency injunction in Kevin's hand. It was a masterpiece of legal corruption. Liam had used his dirty money to buy a judge who was willing to sign a temporary proxy order without a single psychological evaluation. They were holding my daughter hostage to save a failing real estate empire. I simply turned my back on them and walked over to the small sitting area outside the Lily's room. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out my tablet. "What are you doing?" Kevin barked, stepping forward. His false confidence wavered for a fraction of a second. "Did you not hear me, Hazel? The ambulance is on its way. You have less than an hour to make the call." I unlocked my tablet. "Tell me, Kevin," I said, my voice entirely conversational as my fingers flew across the digital keyboard. "How are things at Vanguard Technologies?" Kevin blinked. The sudden pivot in the conversation threw him completely off balance. He puffed out his chest, instinctively defaulting to his corporate ego. "I am the Regional Director of Operations," he stated proudly. "I manage a portfolio worth $80 million. Not that it is any of your business, but since you asked, my career is spectacular. Which is exactly why I have the financial stability to make medical decisions for this child, while you are clearly having a mental breakdown." $80 million, I murmured, opening a highly classified encrypted file on my screen. "That is quite an impressive portfolio for a regional director. I imagine your unvested stock options must be worth a small fortune by now." "They are," Kevin smirked. "I vest next quarter. I will be cashing out close to $2 million. So do not try to play financial games with me, Hazel. You are out of your league." I turned around and walked back toward him. I held the tablet up so the bright screen was mere inches from his face. I held up the acquisition announcement scheduled for the next market opening. Vanguard Technologies had been acquired by Apex Horizon the previous week, subject to ordinary closing conditions and an independent compliance review. Kevin's division stock options and executive conduct now fell within that process. Kevin frowned, looking down at the screen. His eyes scanned the bold black text. I watched his pupils dart back and forth. I watched his breathing stop. I watched the arrogant flush of victory drain completely from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a cheap suit. The document was a finalized acquisition agreement. Vanguard Technologies, where Kevin had spent 4 years climbing the corporate ladder, was now controlled by Apex Horizon. The transaction did not make me his personal executioner, but it placed his conduct within a compliance system he could no longer intimidate. The conglomerate name was printed in large, bold letters at the bottom of the page. Apex Horizon. "No," Kevin whispered, taking a stumbling step backward. He shook his head, his eyes wide with a sudden, crushing terror. "No, this is a joke. This is a fake document." "Apex Horizon acquired Vanguard last Thursday," I said. "We control the management structure and the vesting plan. That does not allow me to punish you for appearing in family court. It does require an independent investigation when an executive uses false filings, employer resources, and a medical threat to extort a colleague and endanger a minor." Patricia looked back and forth between us, her confusion mounting. "What is she talking about, Kevin? Who cares about her stupid tablet? Sign the hospital transfer papers right now." Kevin did not move. He was staring at me as if I had just transformed into a monster. He realized exactly what was happening. He realized the woman he was trying to blackmail was the billionaire who held his entire life in the palm of her hand. The mother he had abandoned because she was a financial burden now possessed the power to erase his entire net worth with a single signature. "Let us discuss the ethics policy you signed," I continued. It permits administrative leave suspended, vesting, and termination for proven dishonesty, extortion, or misuse of company resources. The Compliance Committee, not my anger, would make that decision after reviewing evidence and giving you a chance to respond. Hazel, please. He choked out, his voice suddenly cracking. He held up his hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender. Correct the filing now, I told him. Call your lawyer, withdraw the false allegations, and consent to an emergency clarification preserving Lily's care. That will not erase the employment investigation, but continuing the extortion will add new evidence before the committee meets tomorrow. Kevin's hands began to shake violently. The piece of paper, the emergency injunction that was supposed to be his ultimate weapon, fluttered in his trembling grip. He looked at the tablet and saw his own signature on his employment contract displayed right next to the acquisition terms. The reality of the situation crashed down on him like a physical blow. Sign the transfer papers, Kevin, Patricia screamed, losing her patience entirely. Do what Liam paid you to do. Kevin looked at Patricia with absolute terror. Then he looked at the heavy wooden door to Lily Room. Finally, he looked at me, and he knew I was not bluffing. He knew I would crush him without a second thought. Kevin did not tear the signed order because destroying a copy would not erase a judicial act. He grabbed his phone, called his lawyer, and authorized the immediate withdrawal of the false petition and the unsigned proposed order. Patricia lunged toward him, demanding that he complete the transfer plan, but Kevin stepped away and placed the call on speaker so the nurse could hear his instructions. His lawyer filed an electronic withdrawal and an agreed clarification, preserving Lily's placement. Hospital counsel confirmed receipt through the court system. The legal confusion ended because the record changed, not because paper became confetti. I am out, Kevin stammered, backing away from Patricia. I am not losing my career or facing an extortion investigation for your real estate scandal. He looked at me once, understanding that compliance would still review everything, and hurried toward the elevator. He left the hospital without looking back. The medical threat had ended, but the evidence he created would follow him into Vanguard's independent investigation and the child support proceedings he had ignored for 6 years. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking, but she gripped the device like a lifeline. You think you are so smart, Hazel, she hissed, her voice dripping with bitter venom. You think just because you made a little bit of dirty money, you can disrespect the hierarchy of this family? You think you can throw your brother in prison and walk away unscathed? I crossed my arms, standing my ground. Go home, Mother. It over. It is not even close to over, Patricia spat, jabbing a finger at my face. You can bully a coward like Kevin, but you cannot bully the head of this family. Do not get cocky. Your father is already on his way here. He just parked his car. You know how your father deals with traitors, Hazel. You know exactly what he will do to you when he walks through those elevator doors. The polished steel doors of the hospital elevator slid open with a soft mechanical chime. My father, Gregory, stepped out into the intensive care corridor. He was a man who commanded the very air in a room, an old-school patriarch who wore his tailored navy suits like armor and expected the world to bow at his feet. His silver hair was perfectly combed, and his jaw was set in a rigid line of absolute authority. He did not rush. He did not look frantic like Patricia or Liam. He walked with the heavy, deliberate strides of a man accustomed to blind obedience. Patricia immediately ran to his side, grabbing his arm like a distressed damsel. Gregory gasped, her voice trembling. You have to stop her. She has completely lost her mind. She ruined Liam on national television, and she just threatened Kevin until he ran away. Gregory did not even look at his wife. He held up one hand, silencing her instantly. He stopped 5 feet away from me. He did not glance through the glass window to check on his 6-year-old granddaughter who had just survived open-heart surgery. His cold, calculating eyes were locked entirely on my face. "You have played your little game long enough, Hazel," he said, his voice a deep, rumbling baritone that used to terrify me when I was a child. "Richard Caldwell just called me from his car. He told me about the titanium card. He told me about Apex Horizon." I stood tall, crossing my arms over my chest. "Then you know that your lawyer is incompetent, and your golden boy is going to federal prison." Gregory narrowed his eyes. "I know that my daughter has been hiding a massive corporate syndicate behind my back. I know that you deliberately seized the debt on your brother commercial skyscraper to humiliate this family. And I know that you are going to fix it right now." He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a sleek leather folio. He opened it and produced a thick stack of legal documents carrying the crest of his real estate firm. He tossed the documents onto the small waiting room table next to us. "That is an emergency transfer of assets," Gregory stated, gesturing to the papers. "You are going to sign over your controlling shares of Apex Horizon to my holding company. I will absorb your firm as a subsidiary. We will use your liquid capital to bail Liam out of his legal mess and pay off the investors he defrauded. Once the federal investigation is cleared, I will allow you to maintain a minor advisory role in the company. Consider it your penance for dragging our family name through the mud." "You want me to surrender my company to you?" I asked, my voice perfectly flat. "It is the only way to save your brother," Gregory said, as if he were stating a simple, undeniable fact. "You owe this family, Hazel. Everything you are is because of the name I gave you. You clearly had a stroke of blind luck building this Apex Horizon nonsense, but you do not have the temperament to run a real corporate empire. You are acting on emotion. Women always act on emotion. You need a steady male hand to guide those assets before you destroy yourself." I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "A steady male hand? You mean like Liam, who gambled away your capital and embezzled from a children's charity?" Gregory's face turned a dangerous shade of red. "Do not speak about your brother that way. Liam is a visionary. He simply made a few aggressive financial miscalculations. That is what real men do in business. They take risks." "And women clean up their messes," I countered. "Is that your brilliant business philosophy, father?" "It is the natural order of things," Gregory snapped, stepping closer, trying to use his height to physically intimidate me. "I should have known you would become a liability when I let you move out of my house. I should never have allowed you to pursue those ridiculous corporate ambitions. I should have kept you exactly where you belonged." He pointed at my chest and reminded me of the year he forced me out of a graduate program. I had been 23, studying on scholarship, when he threatened to evict me from the family apartment and cancel every remaining form of support and blacklist me with the business contacts supervising my internship unless I returned as an unpaid clerk. For a year, I answered phones and repaired Liam's accounting errors, while Gregory called it a lesson in loyalty. Lily had not been born yet. Gregory had not protected a child or paid a medical bill. He had exploited the financial pressure he still controlled, threatened my housing and career contacts, and stolen a year of my education so Liam would not have to answer for a tax discrepancy. "You did not teach me loyalty, Gregory," I said, my voice freezing. "You taught me that blood relatives could become creditors and parasites. You taught me to build a fortress high enough that no arrogant man in this family could ever seize my future again." I looked down at the asset transfer documents on the table. I picked up the stack of papers and ripped them cleanly in half, tossing the pieces onto the floor, right next to Kevin's shredded court injunction. "I will never sign over a single share of my company," I told him, looking directly into his furious eyes. "I am not your clerk anymore. I am not the scared girl who dropped out of school to fix your son's mistakes. I am a chief executive officer, and my net worth could buy your failing real estate firm 10 times over. I am not bailing Liam out. I want him to go to prison. I want your corrupt legacy to burn." Patricia gasped, clutching her chest as if she were having a heart attack. Gregory, you cannot let her speak to you like this. Make her sign the papers. Gregory, breathing, became heavy and labored. The veins in his neck bulged against his crisp white collar. He had never been defied like this in his entire life. The realization that he had zero physical or emotional control over me was driving him to the absolute brink. He squared his shoulders, pulling himself up to his full height. He looked at me, not as a father looking at a daughter, but as a ruthless dictator preparing to execute a traitor. "You think you are so powerful, Hazel," he growled, his voice vibrating with pure malice. "You think your little bank accounts make you invincible. But you are forgetting who built the real wealth in this lineage." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. "If you walk away from your brother now," Gregory said, "you walk away from this family forever. I am the executor of the Sterling Generational Trust, and I will amend it today unless you accept my terms." He unlocked the screen and dialed a number, keeping his eyes locked on mine. "If you refuse," he continued, "your name will be removed permanently from the $20 million trust. Neither you nor Lily will receive $1 when I die." He held up the phone, as if a wealth manager could restore the authority he had already lost in the hospital corridor. I looked at the furious red face of the man who had controlled my entire existence, and I felt absolutely nothing. No fear, no intimidation, not even a lingering trace of childhood desperation for his approval. He was holding a $20 million threat over my head, believing it was the ultimate weapon. He thought money was the only language I understood because it was the only language he had ever spoken to me. I did not flinch. I reached into my bag and pulled out one of my own sleek, embossed business cards. I stepped forward and tucked it neatly into the breast pocket of his expensive navy suit, right over his heart. "This hospital is a place of healing, Gregory," I said, my voice perfectly modulated and calm. "It is not a place for hostile corporate negotiations. If you want to discuss the legal restructuring of the Sterling family assets and my inheritance, you will do it on my territory. Bring your lawyers and your documents to the Apex Horizon headquarters in downtown Chicago at exactly 2 o'clock this afternoon. Do not be late." I returned to Lily's room and refused to discuss business again inside the hospital. 4 days later, after her cardiology team confirmed that discharge was approaching, Gregory, Patricia, and Liam arrived at Apex Horizon for the meeting they had demanded. At 1:45 that afternoon, I waited at the head of the obsidian conference table overlooking Lake Michigan. The room was built for corporate negotiations, not family intimidation. Every document Gregory brought would be reviewed on my territory, with records counsel and evidence ready. When the polished steel doors of the private elevator slid open, my family walked in. Gregory led the way, attempting to project his usual dominant aura, but his eyes darted around the extravagant space, taking in the sheer scale of the wealth I had built. Patricia followed close behind, clutching her designer handbag as if someone might steal it. She looked incredibly small in the vast modern room. And then there was Liam. He looked awful. His skin was pale and covered in a sheen of cold sweat. He kept pulling at his collar, looking around like a trapped animal, waiting for the trap door to spring shut. "Take a seat," I offered, gesturing to the leather chairs opposite me. Gregory scoffed, refusing to sit down. He marched straight to the opposite end of the table and slapped a thick legal document down on the polished black surface. "I am not here to admire your stolen office furniture, Hazel," he barked. "I brought the trust amendment just as I promised. You had a few hours to think about your pathetic little rebellion. Now you are going to sign over Apex Horizon to the family firm, or I execute this document right now. You sign this, and you are officially disinherited." Erased from the Sterling lineage. Erased from the generational wealth. I stood up slowly, smoothing the fabric of my tailored skirt. I walked the length of the long table, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor. The room was so quiet, You could hear the steady rhythm of their anxious breathing. I stopped right in front of Gregory and looked down at the document. It was a standard disinheritance clause severing my legal right to the $20 million family trust fund. It was drawn up perfectly by Richard Caldwell. I picked up a heavy silver pen from the table. I did not hesitate. I did not read the fine print. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name with a smooth, sweeping stroke right on the bottom line. I pushed the signed document back toward Gregory. There you go, Father. It is legally binding. I formally reject any and all claims to the Sterling family inheritance. Gregory stared at my signature, his jaw dropping in absolute shock. Patricia gasped, covering her mouth. They had expected tears. They had expected me to beg for forgiveness, to sacrifice my entire company just to stay in their good graces. The fact that I had casually thrown away $20 million short-circuited their entire reality. "Are you insane?" Patricia shrieked, her voice echoing off the acoustic panels. "You just threw away your entire future. You have nothing." Gregory's face twisted into a mask of pure, triumphant malice. He snatched the paper up, clutching it in his fist. "You always were a foolish, emotional girl. You think you won today, Hazel. You think you proved a point. But you just cut your own throat. I am going to make sure your name is dragged through the dirt. You are dead to this family." I smiled, a slow, freezing smile that made Liam physically flinch. "You truly believe you had $20 million to give me?" I asked, walking over to the centralized control panel embedded in the wall. "What are you talking about?" Gregory demanded, his false confidence wavering slightly. "The Sterling Trust has been accumulating interest for 4 decades. I pressed a button on the panel. The heavy motorized blackout blinds slowly descended over the floor-to-ceiling windows, plunging the massive boardroom into a calculated darkness. A silent projector lowered from the ceiling, illuminating the blank wall behind me with a crisp, high-definition display. The screen showed a highly detailed, 50-page financial document. The header read, "Independent Forensic Audit, Sterling Family Trust Fund." I told Gregory to study the independent forensic report. It had not been produced by secretly entering a bank in 20 minutes. As a named beneficiary, before signing the disclaimer I had received, annual statements and Apex's outside team had lawfully reviewed records from the trustee-secured lenders and public filings. Gregory squinted at the screen. "What truth? This is fabricated nonsense." 3 years earlier, the trust held $21.4 million. Its cash balance was now effectively zero. Liam had persuaded Gregory to pledge the assets against margin loans and development guarantees, then moved the borrowed proceeds through shell companies. The report showed both the vanished investments and the liabilities left behind. Patricia let out a strangled cry. Gregory slammed his hands down on the table. "That is a lie. That is a complete fabrication. The money is secured in offshore bonds managed by Liam." The next schedule traced the borrowed money through shell entities and offshore accounts. It did not claim that every foreign transfer was automatically criminal. It showed where the funds went, who authorized them, and how the transactions violated the trust documents and lender covenants. $5 million disappeared into a fraudulent cryptocurrency scheme, $8 million into high-stakes gambling losses, and the rest into luxury spending and failing projects. The negative position came from loans and guarantees secured by the trust, not from an empty account, magically becoming $20 million overdrawn. Gregory slowly turned his head to look at his golden boy. Liam was shaking violently. He had shrunk down into his chair, looking as if he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Liam Gregory whispered, his voice suddenly lacking all of its usual booming authority. "Tell me she is lying. Tell me the trust fund is secure." Liam could not look at his father. He stared at his trembling hands. "I tried to fix it," he choked out, tears streaming down his face. "The market shifted. I had a bad run at the tables. I just needed a little more capital to win it back. I was going to replace it before you ever found out." Patricia dropped to her knees beside Liam's chair, sobbing hysterically. "No. No, this cannot be happening. Our money, our legacy." "You let him manage the family wealth because he was a man." "Gregory," I said, bringing the lights back up in the room. "You trusted him implicitly because he looked like you, and he robbed you blind. He stole my inheritance, he stole his own inheritance, he stole every single cent you spent 40 years accumulating. You just disinherited me from a completely empty bank account." Gregory looked like he was having a stroke. He clutched his chest, leaning heavily against the table. His entire empire, his entire identity as a powerful, wealthy patriarch had just been shattered by the son he worshipped. But I was not finished. I walked back to my seat at the head of the table. There was one final detail. When the pledged investments collapsed, the secured lenders accelerated the loans. After crediting the remaining collateral, the trust and Gregory's personal guarantees still carried a deficiency approaching $20 million. That enforceable deficiency, not the empty trust balance itself, was the toxic debt now being sold. I opened the folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the long table toward Gregory. Apex Horizon did not buy a fictional negative balance. We purchased the defaulted note security interests and Gregory's guarantees through a documented distressed debt sale after the lenders completed their internal review. I had the assignment documents, payment records, and servicing transfer in the black folder. Gregory picked up the paper, his hands trembling so badly the page rattled. "Congratulations, Father," I said. "You did not disinherit me from $20 million. You released me from an empty trust and kept the liabilities created in your name. The lender's rights under those notes now belong to Apex Horizon, and every remedy will be exercised through the contracts and the courts." The absolute silence in the boardroom was deafening. The only sound was the faint hum of the climate control system and the ragged, desperate breathing coming from my brother. Gregory stared at the single sheet of paper detailing his catastrophic financial ruin. The heavy mahogany table seemed to stretch between us like a battlefield strewn with the casualties of his colossal arrogance. He had walked into my headquarters expecting to crush a rebellious daughter. Instead, he had just discovered that his entire legacy was a mirage, and his golden boy was a spectacular fraud. Liam could not maintain the facade for another second. The immaculate tailored suit he wore suddenly looked like a clown costume on a terrified child. His knees literally gave out. He collapsed onto the hardwood floor, scrambling frantically toward Patricia. He wrapped his arms around her legs, burying his face in the fabric of her designer skirt, sobbing with loud, pathetic gasps. "Mom, you have to understand!" he wailed, his voice cracking under the weight of his own pathetic excuses. "The market was completely unpredictable. The tech sector took a massive dive right after I moved the funds. I had margin calls coming in every single hour. The offshore brokers were threatening to liquidate everything and freeze the accounts. I was just trying to bridge the gap. I was trying to protect the family assets by doubling down. I thought I could win it back before the quarterly audit." Patricia looked down at her golden child, her hands trembling as she stroked his perfectly styled hair. Her mind was fracturing, unable to reconcile the genius son she worshipped with the weeping thief clinging to her ankles. But the Sterling family delusion ran deep. Instead of holding him accountable, Patricia did what she had always done. She weaponized her panic and aimed it directly at the designated scapegoat. She snapped her head up and glared at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You did this!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the acoustic panels. "You orchestrated this entire setup just to destroy him. You are a cold-blooded monster, Hazel. He is your own flesh and blood, your own brother. He made a financial miscalculation under immense pressure, and instead of helping him, you bought his debt to hold him hostage? You drove him to the absolute brink just to satisfy your sick, vindictive ego. You set a trap for your own family. I sat perfectly still, absorbing her toxic outburst without a single flicker of emotion. It was truly fascinating to watch her mental gymnastics in real time. Liam had stolen $20 million of their money, violating federal law and squandering generations of wealth. But in her twisted reality, I was the villain for simply exposing the crime. A financial miscalculation, I repeated, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. Is that what we are calling massive wire fraud and illegal gambling these days? You always were his most devoted enabler, Patricia. You would rather watch your entire life burn to the ground than admit your son lit the match. But let us talk about family loyalty. Let us talk about what blood relatives do to each other when there is money on the line. I turned my attention away from my screaming mother and looked down at Liam, who was still sniveling on the floor. "Get up, Liam," I commanded, the authority in my tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "Stand up and look at me like the brilliant corporate executive you pretend to be." He slowly pulled himself up, using the back of his leather chair for support. His face was blotchy and streaked with tears. He looked like a cornered rat, waiting for the final blow. "You think today is about the $20 million?" I asked him, stepping away from my chair and pacing slowly down the length of the boardroom. "You think I bought this toxic debt just to humiliate our father and seize his assets? This is not about the family trust, Liam. This is about a very specific debt you owe me. A debt that has been accumulating massive interest for exactly 6 years." Gregory frowned heavily, finding his voice for the first time since the devastating reveal. "What are you talking about, Hazel? He stole the trust fund. What else could he possibly owe you?" I pressed a button on my smart tablet, and the mass projector screen behind me transitioned from the forensic audit to a paused video file. The digital timestamp in the corner read a date from exactly 6 years ago. When I was 27 years old, I built my very first startup. I explained to the room, my voice echoing with lethal precision. It was a boutique logistics firm. I poured my absolute soul into it. I maxed out my personal credit cards, I worked 20-hour days, and I secured a proprietary client list that was set to revolutionize supply chain management in the Midwest. We were 2 days away from signing a massive exclusivity contract that would have secured my future entirely. And then, overnight, everything vanished. I watched Gregory brow furrow as he searched his memory. I remembered that he said dismissively, attempting to regain some fraction of his patriarchal authority. "Your little delivery company went bankrupt. Your competitors beat you to the market. It proved you lacked the killer instinct required for real business. It proved women act on emotion rather than strategy." "My competitors did not beat you to the market, Father," I replied, stopping directly across the table from him. "They bought my market. And they bought it from someone on the inside." I clicked play on the remote. The first camera showed my old startup office after midnight. I had installed it when cache and files began disappearing. The image was black and white, but clear enough to show Liam connecting an external drive, entering the stolen password, and copying my client list supplier agreements and financial projections. Patricia gasped audibly. Liam's eyes widened in pure, unadulterated terror. He stopped breathing. He knew exactly what he was looking at. On the screen, a younger Liam, wearing a dark hoodie, sneaked into the frame. He looked around nervously before plugging a high-capacity external hard drive directly into my primary server. The video clearly showed him typing in the master override password, a password he had stolen while visiting my apartment for a supposed sibling bonding dinner the week prior. He spent exactly 14 minutes copying every single piece of proprietary data, every client contact, every supplier contract, and every financial projection I had spent 2 years building. The second clip came from the building's parking system. My investigator had requested and preserved it immediately after the theft, before the ordinary retention period expired. It showed Liam leaving with the drive and entering a rival executive's car. The executive remained unnamed because a later civil settlement was confidential, but Liam's face, the device, and the cash envelope were unmistakable. I paused the video right on the frame where Liam was counting the stacks of $100 bills. "You sold my company for $50,000, I said. "Gambling creditors had frightened you, so you sold my client list to a competitor and watched me lose my apartment, my car, and 2 years of work. Then you sat at family dinners and repeated Gregory's claim that I had failed because women lacked business instinct." Liam was hyperventilating. His chest heaved as he backed away from the screen, his hands raised defensively. "Hazel, I did not want to. They were going to hurt me. I owed the wrong people money. Vance promised he would just use the data for leverage. I did not know it would completely destroy your company. I was going to pay you back once my bonuses cleared." "You knew exactly what it would do," I snapped, my voice finally rising to match the intensity of the rage I had suppressed for 6 years. "You just did not care, because you knew Mother and Father would never question your sudden influx of cash. You played the golden child while you utterly destroyed my life. You smiled at me at Thanksgiving while my electricity was being shut off." Patricia was completely speechless. The undeniable video evidence of her precious son committing corporate espionage against his own sister had finally short-circuited her defensive reflexes. Even Gregory looked violently ill. He worshipped ruthless business tactics, but getting caught stealing from family and selling out to a rival for petty cash was a sign of unforgivable weakness. It was sloppy and pathetic. "You are a thief, Liam," I told him, stepping right into his personal space, forcing him to look me in the eye. "You are a coward and a parasite. I did not buy the family debt to ruin you. I bought the family debt because I wanted to look you in the eye when I took everything you have ever valued. You owe me 6 years of my life." Before Liam could even attempt to formulate another pathetic excuse, the heavy obsidian double doors at the far end of the boardroom swung open. The timing was immaculate. I had orchestrated every single second of this afternoon to ensure maximum devastation. Mr. Thompson entered in a charcoal suit, carrying a due diligence file. I had invited the family's principal financing partner and disclosed in advance that the corporate meeting would be recorded and transmitted to authorized participants. He had heard Liam's admissions through the conference feed and reviewed the supporting documents with his legal team. He had not been secretly spying in an antechamber. He was an invited financing counterparty conducting due diligence before a proposed $50 million transaction, and everyone at the table had entered beneath a written notice that the meeting was recorded. Mr. Thompson walked slowly past my stunned parents and stopped next to me. He did not look angry. He looked profoundly disappointed. He stared at Liam with the kind of clinical disgust usually reserved for stepping in something unpleasant on the sidewalk. Gregory's face lost whatever remaining color it had. He looked like he was about to suffer a massive coronary event. "Arthur," he stammered, stepping forward with his hand outstretched, a desperate smile plastered on his face. "What are you doing here? This is a private family matter. We are just having a minor internal dispute." "Not anymore," Gregory Thompson replied. "My audit and legal teams reviewed the trust losses, the charity transfers, and the evidence of corporate espionage. Hearing your son admit the conduct removed any remaining doubt. Effective immediately, our firm is suspending further advances under the existing agreements and issuing the notices required by those contracts." "And to be entirely clear," he continued, "the proposed $50 million joint venture scheduled for Tuesday will not close. We will preserve our claims, notify the affected parties, and pursue only the remedies available under the financing documents and applicable law." The loss of the $50 million contract was the final nail. The reality of his situation, federal prison, absolute bankruptcy, and public disgrace crashed down on him. He scrambled off the floor, his designer suit wrinkled and stained with his own nervous sweat. He looked wildly around the boardroom, searching for an exit, a loophole, a scapegoat. He found nothing but the cold, hard reflection of his own failure. "Mr. Thompson, wait!" Liam shrieked, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical whine. He lunged toward the heavy doors, but Patricia stepped in his way, instinctively throwing her arms open to catch her golden boy. "Oh, Liam, my sweet boy!" Patricia cried, tears ruining her expensive makeup. "It is going to be okay. Your father will fix this. We will hire the best lawyers. We will mortgage the house. We will make this go away just like we always do." "Do not touch me!" Liam roared, batting her hands away with such violent force that Patricia stumbled. "You stupid woman!" Liam spat, his face contorting into a mask of pure, vicious hatred. "This is your fault. This is all your fault. You ruined me!" Patricia gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been shot. "Liam, what are you saying? I have loved you. I have given you everything. You gave me exactly what I wanted, and you never told me no," Liam screamed, pacing like a trapped animal. "You covered up my mistakes. You paid off the people I hurt. You bought my way out of trouble every single time. You spent my entire life telling me I was a genius, telling me I was untouchable, telling me the rules did not apply to me because I was the son of this family. You made me believe I could not lose. You made me weak." "Look at her!" Liam yelled. "You treated her like garbage. You threw her out to the wolves and it made her a billionaire. You babied me and wrapped me in bubble wrap, and now I am going to federal prison? You did not love me, Mother. You just loved having a little prince to show off to your country club friends. You ruined my life. I need to catch Thompson," Liam muttered, his eyes darting frantically toward the door. "I need to beg him. I need to tell him it was a misunderstanding." He lunged for the exit again. Patricia, desperate to maintain her delusion, stepped into his path one last time, reaching out to grab his lapels. "Liam, please, you cannot beg. You are a sterling." "Get out of my way," Liam snarled. With a brutal, thoughtless shove, Liam planted both hands on his mother's shoulders and pushed her hard. Patricia let out a sharp cry as she lost her balance. Her designer heels slipped on the polished hardwood, and she crashed to the floor, hitting her elbow hard against the base of the conference table. Liam did not even look back. He ripped the heavy doors open and sprinted down the hallway, shouting for Mr. Thompson, abandoning his mother on the floor and his father in a catatonic stupor. Patricia lay on the floor for a long moment, waiting for her husband to rush to her aid. But Gregory remained frozen in his chair, a hollow shell of a man. Slowly, Patricia realized she was entirely on her own. The men she had worshipped, the men she had sacrificed her own daughter to protect, had discarded her the second they lost their power. She pushed herself up onto her knees, her hair disheveled, her expensive silk blouse rumpled. She looked around the massive billion-dollar boardroom, and finally her eyes landed on me. She looked at my tailored suit, my unyielding posture, and the sheer, undeniable wealth radiating from every corner of my empire. Patricia dragged herself forward on her knees, reaching a trembling hand out toward me. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but this time they were aimed at a new target. Hazel Patricia wept, her voice dropping into a pathetic, pleading register. "Hazel, my beautiful girl." "I was so wrong," Patricia sobbed, dragging herself an inch closer. "I was blinded by your father. I was blinded by Liam. They poisoned me against you. But I see the truth now. I see how strong you are. You are my daughter, my brilliant, successful daughter. I am so sorry for everything I ever did to you. Please, Hazel, Mom was wrong. We can fix this. We can start over, just you and me. Let me be your mother again." "Do not touch me, Patricia," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing, lethal whisper. "You are not sorry," I told her, dissecting her fake remorse with surgical precision. "You are not experiencing a motherly awakening. You are just terrified because your golden boy shoved you to the floor and your husband lost his checkbook. You are looking at me and you see a new bank account to drain, a new host to latch onto. You spent 33 years calling me a failure. You do not get to call me daughter just because I am the only one left standing." Before Patricia could attempt another pathetic excuse, the sharp, crisp vibration of my private cell phone sliced through the heavy silence of the boardroom. I broke eye contact with the weeping woman on the floor and pulled the phone from my pocket. It was a direct line from the Chicago Medical Center. I swiped to answer, bringing the phone to my ear. Ms. Hazel, the chief medical director, said I wanted to call personally. Today is Lily's 6th post-operative day. Her final inpatient scans are encouraging her heart function is stable, the incision is healing, and she can finish recovery at home with medication activity restrictions and scheduled cardiology visits. I have signed the discharge plan, and she is asking for you. A genuine smile, the first real smile I had worn all day, spread across my face. The heavy armor I had worn to crush my enemies melted away, leaving only the profound, overwhelming relief of a mother whose child was finally safe. "Thank you, Dr. Harrison," I said, my voice softening. "Thank you for everything. I am on my way right now." I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. I picked up my leather tote bag from the table, securing it over my shoulder. I looked down at Patricia, who was still sobbing on the floor, and Gregory, who was staring blankly at the wall. They looked so small, so incredibly insignificant. The demons that had haunted my childhood were nothing more than pathetic strangers in expensive clothes. "Enjoy the debt," I told them, turning my back on my parents for the absolute last time. "My real family is waiting." I stepped into my private executive elevator and let the heavy obsidian doors slide shut, permanently cutting off the stifling air of the boardroom. The descent to the ground floor was entirely silent, but my mind was roaring with the profound magnitude of what had just occurred. The war was officially over. Liam was inevitably heading to a federal penitentiary. Gregory was financially buried under a $20 million mountain of debt that I exclusively controlled. And Patricia was left discarded on a hardwood floor, stripped of the wealth and status she had worshipped above her own flesh and blood. They had tried to break me, to force me into submission, by threatening the life of my sick child. Instead, they had shattered their entire legacy against my armor. My security detail fell into perfect formation as I exited the Apex Horizons skyscraper. The bright Chicago afternoon sun hit my face, feeling warmer and more vibrant than it had in years. I climbed into the back of my waiting armored vehicle and instructed my driver to head straight back to the Chicago Medical Center. The drive across the city felt completely different now. The heavy, suffocating weight of my family's toxic shadow was permanently lifted from my shoulders. I was no longer a victim fighting for survival. I was a conqueror, returning home to claim my prize. When I arrived at the pediatric intensive care unit, the atmosphere was a brilliant, stark contrast to the dark, oppressive energy of my corporate headquarters. The sterile white medical hallways seemed to glow with a quiet, peaceful hum. The nurses at the central station, who had witnessed my family's abhorrent behavior just hours ago, now greeted me with wide, genuine smiles of profound relief. I walked down the quiet corridor toward the VIP recovery suite and pushed open the heavy wooden door. My breath caught in my throat. Sitting on the edge of the pristine hospital bed, swinging her little legs back and forth, was my beautiful 6-year-old daughter. Lily was no longer wearing a pale, oversized hospital gown. She was dressed in a crisp, brand-new pastel yellow sundress that I had ordered delivered for her discharge. The terrifying grayish tint that had shadowed her delicate skin for months was entirely eradicated. Her cheeks were flushed with a healthy, vibrant pink. Her bright eyes sparkled with pure, unadulterated life. The massive, terrifying machines that used to monitor her failing heart were powered down and pushed unceremoniously into the corner of the room. "Mommy!" she cheered happily, hopping off the high bed and running straight toward me. I dropped to my knees, right there on the linoleum floor, and caught her in my arms, burying my face in her soft, fragrant hair. I held her tight, closing my eyes and feeling the strong, steady, perfectly normal rhythm of her newly repaired heart beating against my chest. This was my ultimate victory. The billion-dollar acquisitions, the hostile takeovers, the titanium credit cards, they were all simply tools. This small, healthy child holding tightly onto my neck was the entire reason I had built an empire from the ground up. The chief medical director stood by the window with the discharge plan. "Lily is recovering exceptionally well," he said, "but she is not magically finished with cardiac care." The team reviewed her medications, warning signs, activity limits, and follow-up appointments. Her vital signs were stable, and she was ready to continue healing at home. I stood up, holding Lily's small hand firmly and securely in mine. "Thank you, Dr. Harrison, for absolutely everything you have done for us." My personal security team quietly and efficiently gathered our few remaining bags. We walked out of the VIP suite, leaving the nightmare of the past few weeks behind us, and took the private, secure elevator down to the main lobby. As the steel door slid open on the ground floor, a sudden, chaotic wall of aggressive noise hit us. The hospital lobby was completely swarmed. Word had rapidly leaked to the local press and financial outlets about the explosive events of the afternoon. The hostile takeover of Vanguard Technologies, the sudden, catastrophic collapse of the Sterling Family Trust, and Liam's highly publicized impending federal indictment had created a massive media frenzy. Reporters, cameramen, and ruthless journalists were packed tightly behind the velvet security ropes, shouting loud questions and flashing bright camera bulbs. They had tracked me here, knowing this was the only logical place I would go after dismantling my family's real estate empire. My security detail immediately formed a tight, professional perimeter around Lily and me, shielding our faces from the blinding, flashing lights. We began to make our swift way toward the main exit doors. Then, a high-pitched, hysterical, and terribly familiar voice pierced right through the clamoring noise of the aggressive press. "Hazel? Lily, please let me through. Let a loving grandmother see her precious little angel." Pushing her way frantically through the aggressive crowd of hungry reporters was Patricia. She looked utterly deranged. Her expensive designer silk blouse was still wrinkled from being brutally shoved to the floor by her golden boy Liam. Her premium makeup was slightly smeared, but she had clearly attempted to rapidly fix her hair for the awaiting cameras. Most absurd of all, she was dragging a massive, gaudy pink teddy bear that was almost as tall as she was. It still had the hospital gift shop price tag dangling awkwardly from its fuzzy ear. She had followed me. Realizing that Gregory was a ruined, bankrupt man and Liam was a lost criminal cause, Patricia was making one final, desperate, theatrical play for social survival. She knew the news cameras were actively rolling. She knew her elite reputation in Chicago high society was about to be completely obliterated by the evening news. She was attempting to boldly hijack my public narrative, trying to publicly brand herself as the loving, devoted matriarch rushing frantically to the hospital to comfort her sick granddaughter. She hoped the intense public pressure of the cameras would force me to acknowledge her and maintain her wealthy lifestyle. "Look at my beautiful, brave granddaughter Patricia," wept loudly, ensuring every single microphone in the crowded lobby captured her trembling voice. She shoved the giant, ridiculous bear forward over the velvet rope. "Grandma brought you a big present, sweetheart. I have been so terribly worried about your surgery all day. Grandma is finally here now." Lily shrank back immediately, hiding behind my legs. She gripped the fabric of my tailored skirt tightly with her small hands. She did not recognize the weeping woman. In 6 years, Patricia had never once visited our tiny, struggling apartment. She had never sent a single birthday card. She had never once called to ask about a single, terrifying cardiology appointment. To my daughter, Patricia was nothing more than a loud, frightening stranger holding a cheap stuffed animal. Patricia took another deliberate step forward, reaching her manicured hand out toward Lily's face. "Come give Grandma a big hug, darling. Let them see how much we love each other." "Do not take another step toward my child," I commanded. "Hazel, please," Patricia stammered, maintaining her theatrical crying for the benefit of the press. "We are family. I just want to properly celebrate my granddaughter's miraculous recovery." "You cannot maliciously keep me away from my own blood." I looked at the giant, tacky teddy bear and then back to her desperate, calculating eyes. "You are a phenomenal actress, Patricia. But we are entirely out of time, and I am completely out of patience. You ruthlessly abandoned me when I had absolutely nothing. You willingly allowed your corrupt husband and your criminal son to legally threaten this innocent child's life this very morning, just to save your bank accounts. You do not get to play the loving grandmother right now, just because your trust fund is empty and the cameras are rolling." Patricia opened her mouth to argue, to spin another desperate web of toxic public lies, but I raised my hand slightly, signaling the head of my security detail. 2 massive men in tailored suits stepped smoothly and aggressively between Patricia and us, creating an impenetrable physical wall of solid muscle. "Your presence here is a problem of ours," I told her, my voice echoing with crystal clear finality through the quiet hospital lobby, "and I refuse to deal with it." I turned my back on her, completely scooping Lily up safely into my arms. We walked briskly through the automatic sliding glass doors and stepped out into the bright Chicago afternoon. My personal driver was waiting patiently with the door open to a sleek black armored SUV. I settled Lily carefully into her plush leather seat and climbed in beside her, shutting out the noise of the world. Patricia was left standing, completely alone in the center of the hospital lobby, still awkwardly holding her absurd pink teddy bear, looking utterly defeated and entirely pathetic. The moment she realized I was truly gone and the performance had failed, the reporters instantly stopped caring about her fake grandmother routine. Like a school of hungry sharks smelling fresh blood in the water, they swarmed her aggressively. I could see thick microphones being shoved relentlessly into her pale face. They were loudly asking her about Liam embezzling millions in charity funds. They were shouting rapid-fire questions about the bankrupt Sterling Trust. They were brutally demanding to know exactly how it felt to lose a $20 million empire in a single day. The driver put the heavy vehicle in gear, and we pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving the shattered ruins of my past far behind us. 1 week later, the air in my corner office at Apex Horizon was completely still. The panoramic view of the Chicago skyline was bathed in bright mid-morning sunlight. Everything in my life had finally settled into a perfect, harmonious rhythm. Lily was recovering beautifully at home, under the care of a private pediatric nurse. She was spending her days painting colorful pictures of our new future, entirely unaware of the toxic wreckage I had permanently removed from our lives. Gregory and Patricia were facing the brutal reality of their empty bank accounts, and Liam was currently out on federal bail wearing a government-issued ankle monitor while awaiting his criminal trial for wire fraud. The Sterling family empire was reduced to nothing but dust and legal fees. I was reviewing an acquisition portfolio for a tech firm in London when the heavy acoustic doors to my office suddenly swung open. My director of communications, Marcus, practically sprinted into the room. Marcus was a seasoned crisis management veteran. He was a man who routinely handled catastrophic oil spills, corporate embezzlement scandals, and international PR nightmares without breaking a single sweat. But today, his tie was crooked and his breathing was shallow. "Hazel, we have a massive problem," he said, bracing his hands on the edge of my obsidian desk. I did not look up from my documents. "We handle problems every single day, Marcus. That is the entire foundation of our business model. Take a breath and give me the executive summary." He slid a silver tablet across the polished surface of my desk. "This is not a corporate client issue, Hazel. This is a direct, targeted attack on you personally. It is trending #1 across 3 different social media platforms, and the mainstream news outlets are already picking it up for their noon broadcasts." I finally set my pen down and picked up the tablet. The screen was playing a video from a notorious internet provocateur known for peddling sensationalized conspiracy theories and character assassinations. The production value was cheap, but the headline blazing across the bottom of the screen was designed for maximum viral outrage. "Billionaire CEO steals charity funds to save sick child and evicts elderly parents." I tapped the screen to unmute the audio. The vlog-a-man with slicked back hair and an obnoxious volume level was pacing in front of a green screen projecting photos of my face next to images of Gregory and Patricia looking deliberately disheveled. "This so-called self-made billionaire, Hazel Sterling, is a complete fraud," the vlogger shouted into his microphone. "Anonymous sources close to the family have just provided us with exclusive documents. She did not build Apex Horizon with hard work. She built it with dirty money embezzled directly from a children's charity fund managed by her own brother." When her brother Liam discovered the theft and tried to report her, she framed him for the crime, using her massive corporate wealth to buy off judges and federal investigators. And the worst part is, she used that stolen blood money to pay for her daughter's VIP hospital suite before literally throwing her sick, elderly parents out onto the street to freeze. The video cut to a brief, highly edited audio clip of Patricia weeping hysterically, begging for a second chance. It was clearly recorded during her pathetic performance in the hospital lobby last week, but entirely stripped of context. "Look at the view count," Marcus urged, pointing a shaking finger at the corner of the screen. "It hit 4 million views in 2 hours. The comments are vicious. People are calling for federal investigations into Apex Horizon. Our legal department is already fielding calls from panicked shareholders. The narrative is spreading like wildfire." Marcus was pacing the length of my office. "We need to issue a massive cease and desist order immediately," he insisted. "We need to deploy the legal team to file a defamation lawsuit against the vlogger and every platform hosting the video. I can have a press release drafted in 10 minutes, categorically denying these absurd allegations and threatening severe litigation." "No," I said, my voice slicing cleanly through his frantic energy. "Lawsuits take months of boring depositions, and press releases just make us look defensive and weak. If we send cease and desist letters, the internet will just accuse us of using billionaire resources to silence the truth. It will only validate Liam's pathetic narrative." "Then what do we do?" Hazel Marcus asked, stopping in his tracks. "We cannot just let this sit out there. Our clients hire us to protect their reputations. If we cannot protect yours, our credibility takes a massive hit." "Cancel my entire afternoon schedule, Marcus," I instructed, turning back to face him with a freezing, calculated smile. "Contact the major network news anchors, the ones who have been begging my office for an exclusive sit-down interview ever since we seized Vanguard Technologies last week. Tell them I am ready to talk." "Not a recorded segment," I corrected, walking back to my desk and opening the secure biometric safe hidden in the lower drawer. I pulled out a thick, encrypted hard drive. The drive contained every single piece of absolute, verifiable proof I had gathered over the last 6 years. It held the forensic accounting of the drained family trust. It held the high-definition video of Liam committing corporate espionage. It held the forged emergency medical injunction Liam had purchased to threaten Lily's life. An amateur is trying to play media games with a crisis management CEO, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, unyielding register. Turn on the cameras, Marcus. Prepare for a live, national broadcast. Marcus scrambled into action with the terrifying efficiency of a man who knew exactly how to wage a digital war. The executive media suite at Apex Horizon was built for global crisis management, and within 3 minutes, the encrypted, high-definition cameras were rolling. We bypassed the traditional media gatekeepers entirely and pushed a direct broadcast link to every major social platform simultaneously. I sat behind my obsidian desk, folding my hands perfectly still. I did not hire makeup artists. I did not put on a sympathetic pastel sweater to play the victim. I wore my sharpest charcoal executive suit and stared dead into the camera lens with the chilling calm of an apex predator. My name is Hazel Sterling. I began, my voice cutting through the digital airways with absolute freezing precision. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Horizon. Over the past 4 hours, a coordinated defamation campaign has accused me of embezzling charitable funds to pay for my daughter's medical care. I am not here to offer a tearful denial. I am not here to ask for your sympathy. I am here to show you exactly how the Sterling family conducts its business. I tapped the control panel. The screen behind me displayed a certified forensic ledger with account numbers, routing numbers, donor identities, and unrelated personal information redacted. Transaction dates, amounts, receiving entities, document hashes, and the independent auditor's certification remained visible, giving the public evidence without exposing credentials that could be misused. This is the primary ledger for the Sterling Foundation for Pediatric Care, I stated cleanly. It is a charity my brother Liam Sterling has managed for the past 5 years. If you look at the highlighted column, you will see precisely $12 million in charitable donations collected from hard-working citizens across this country. Now look at the outgoing wire transfers. I clicked the remote. A thick red line traced the money leaving the charity account, bouncing rapidly through 3 anonymous shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. The money did not go to sick children, I explained, letting the horrific reality echo across millions of screens. It went directly to a high-stakes illegal gambling syndicate operating out of Macau. My brother embezzled charity funds to cover massive personal gambling debts and catastrophic losses in the commercial real estate market. The documents currently displayed on your screen have already been handed over directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service. I paused, letting the financial devastation sink in. Marcus was standing off camera, holding up his tablet. The live chat feeds were moving so incredibly fast they were nothing but a solid blur of text. The public outrage was instantaneous and explosive. The internet loves a juicy corporate scandal, but they absolutely despise a thief who steals money meant for dying children. The tide of public opinion slammed violently into reverse. But Liam was not the only target today. My parents had allowed this toxic narrative to spread. They had eagerly participated in it. They had tried to paint themselves as elderly, vulnerable victims thrown out into the freezing street by a heartless daughter. The vloggers you watched this morning claimed I am a cold-blooded monster who abandoned her loving parents. I continued, my tone dropping into a dangerous quiet register that demanded absolute silence. They played highly edited audio of my mother weeping in a hospital lobby. They want you to believe that blood is thicker than water. Let me show you exactly what my family blood looks like. I clicked the remote again. The financial records vanished, replaced by a screenshot of the family group chat from the week of Lily's surgery. The timestamp sender identities and complete thread were visible. It was not an older message moved to a different year for dramatic effect. This week, after Lily survived open heart surgery, I told the audience I sent my family a photograph from the hospital and wrote that she wanted to see them. Liam answered busy. Handle it. Patricia answered, she lived. Stop making her our problem. They were attending his gala, while my daughter recovered in intensive care. I stepped aside, pointing directly at the massive projection of the text message. This was the exact response I received from my family, I stated. The message on the screen matched the opening of the story exactly. She lived. Stop making her our problem. Below it, Liam's reply read, busy, handle it. No one had called Lily an it in this current exchange, and I did not need to alter their words to reveal their cruelty. I let the complete thread remain on screen. Millions of parents could see the photograph, the request for a visit, the read receipts, and the responses. The cruelty came from their refusal to show up after surgery, not from a fabricated quotation. 6 years earlier, Gregory had separately called us a stain on the family. But that history was not being disguised as this week's text. The digital chat feeds completely froze for a fraction of a second, out of sheer collective shock, before erupting into a raging inferno of visceral, protective fury. People were not just angry anymore, they were absolutely disgusted. I did not embezzle a single cent to save my daughter, I declared, staring straight through the camera lens. I built a multi-billion-dollar empire from the absolute ground up because I learned early on that if I wanted to protect my child, I had to become a predator in a world full of parasites. I bought the Sterling family debt legally. I acquired their failing assets legally. They are not victims. They are financial criminals who are currently facing the exact consequences they earned. The broadcast had been live for less than 7 minutes, but the execution was flawless. Marcus was practically vibrating with adrenaline as he monitored the incoming financial data. He flashed his screen toward me, and the numbers were staggering. The fallout was apocalyptic. The boycott was moving at the speed of light. Twitter and every major social platform were ablaze with unadulterated hatred aimed directly at the Sterling family. Corporate sponsors were dropping Gregory commercial real estate firm in real time. Institutional investors watching the broadcast immediately triggered massive panicked sell-offs. The stock price of the Sterling Holding Company, which was already bleeding, plummeted into a total freefall. Trading on their ticker symbol was forcefully halted as the stock hit absolute rock bottom before I even finished my sentence. Their legacy was not just ruined, it was scorched from the earth. I ended the broadcast by saying Apex Horizons lawyers would evaluate defamation claims against the people who knowingly fabricated evidence or repeated accusations after receiving corrections. We would not sue every journalist who reported a developing controversy in good faith. Accountability would follow proof, not my anger. Then I thanked the audience and prepared to end the feed. Before I could signal my production team to cut the main feed, Marcus suddenly gasped, pointing wildly at the secondary television monitor mounted on the far wall of the media suite. "Hazel, look!" he shouted, entirely forgetting his professional composure. The major networks placed an exterior live shot of Liam's building beside my broadcast. Reporters had gathered after the federal case became public. Agents entered through the secured lobby under a warrant approved before my livestream began. No helicopter camera could see through walls or predict what happened inside. My timing with the FBI dossier had been completely immaculate. Minutes later, agents escorted Liam through the main entrance in handcuffs, while cameras recorded from the public sidewalk. They did not smash his balcony doors for television. The warrant, arrest plan, and timing belonged to investigators and the court, not to my media team or a dossier I could activate on command. The split screen went dark, leaving the media suite silent. Liam's arrest did not prove guilt, and I did not claim that it did, but it destroyed his assertion that the investigation had been invented during my livestream. The market reaction and criminal process were now moving on separate tracks, each governed by its own rules. The next morning, the atmosphere in the Apex Horizon building was electric. We were managing the Vanguard Technologies acquisition while fielding calls from panicked Sterling investors looking for a lifeline. I was reviewing a commercial real estate portfolio when the secure line on my desk chimed. My head of security informed me that Gregory was standing in the ground floor lobby. He did not have an appointment. He did not have his usual entourage of aggressive corporate lawyers. He was completely alone and asking for 10 minutes of my time. "Send him up," I instructed, putting my pen down and folding my hands on the obsidian glass of my desk. When the heavy acoustic doors opened, I barely recognized the man walking into my office. The terrifying patriarch who had spent his entire life commanding rooms and intimidating rivals was gone. Gregory looked as though he had aged 20 years in a single night. His posture was completely defeated. His shoulders were slumped under the heavy wool of a suit that suddenly looked 2 sizes too big. He shuffled toward the guest chair, moving with the hesitant, unsteady gait of a man who had finally realized his own mortality and the absolute ruins of his legacy. "Hazel." He began, his voice a raspy, hollow echo of his usual booming baritone. "I am asking you to listen to me, not as a chief executive, but as a daughter." I leaned back in my leather chair, my expression entirely neutral. "You lost the right to invoke that title a long time ago, Gregory. State your business." He said Liam had been detained after his initial appearance because prosecutors presented evidence of offshore accounts and flight risk. A detention hearing was pending. The family company was collapsing as lenders accelerated commercial loans. Gregory asked me to finance the defense pledge property for any release conditions the judge might permit and inject capital into the business. He leaned over the desk and begged me to rescue Liam, support him publicly, and save the company. I reminded him that release or detention belonged to the judge, not to a relative who could simply write a federal bail check. I would not conceal assets, finance obstruction, or use Apex to erase evidence. Blood did not convert criminal process into a private invoice. I stared at him, letting the pathetic desperation of his plea hang in the quiet air of the office. He was a man who had built his entire identity on the archaic belief that men lead and women serve. He worshipped the concept of a strong, ruthless patriarch who provided for his lineage. He had sacrificed my future to protect his incompetent son. Now stripped of his wealth and his illusion of control, he was resorting to the exact emotional manipulation he used to despise in others. "You want to talk about blood, Gregory?" I asked, my voice dropping to a freezing, lethal register. "You want to talk about the sacred bond of family?" I stood up and walked around the desk, closing the distance between us. I stood towering over him while he remained seated, shrinking back into his chair. "Let me refresh your memory about how this family treats its own blood," I said. 6 years ago, I was lying on a sterile gurney in an overcrowded emergency room. I had just gone through 30 hours of agonizing labor entirely alone. The man I married had abandoned me because he was a coward who ran from responsibility. I was holding a newborn baby whose heart was failing. I was terrified, bankrupt, and desperate. I reached out to the man who was supposed to be my protector. "I sent you a message begging for help." Gregory looked away, unable to meet my eyes, his face flushing a deep, shameful red. "I remember the exact words you sent back," I continued, every syllable striking like a hammer. "You sent a message to the group chat. You called my daughter an it. You told me not to make her your problem. But there was a second part to that text message, wasn't there, Father? A sentence you added just to ensure I understood exactly how little value I held in your eyes." Gregory closed his eyes, shaking his head slowly. "Please, Hazel, do not do this. You typed, 'You are a stain on this family.' I recited, the ancient wound finally exposed to the harsh light of day. You abandoned your own daughter and your dying granddaughter in an emergency room because we were a financial inconvenience. You decided we were worthless. You decided Liam, the son who stole from charity and gambled away your entire legacy, was the only blood that mattered. You do not get to walk into my empire now begging for salvation and hiding behind a word you completely desecrated. Hazel. I was wrong. He choked out a single tear tracking through the deep wrinkles of his face. I was a foolish, arrogant old man. I made a terrible mistake. I am sorry. I watched him cry and felt absolutely no satisfaction. There was no joy in watching a weak man crumble. There was only the cold, hard reality of consequence. Apologies do not decide detention, Gregory, I said. I will not fund a false defense pledge assets to hide flight risk or ask prosecutors for favors. Liam will have counsel, an initial appearance, a detention hearing, and the presumption of innocence. If convicted, or if he pleads guilty, sentencing will occur later, after the required reports and arguments. Gregory dropped his face into his hands, letting out a long, ragged breath of absolute defeat. Then we have nothing, he whispered. The banks will seize everything. They will take the commercial properties. They will take the firm. They are going to foreclose on the family mansion. Your mother and I will be out on the freezing street. We will have absolutely nothing left to our names. I opened a pristine black folder on my desk and extracted a thick, legally binding contract. I laid it flat on the glass surface and slid a heavy silver pen next to it. I did not say I was leaving you with nothing, I corrected my tone, shifting from righteous fury to absolute clinical business precision. I am a corporate executive, Gregory, and I never let a prime real estate asset go to waste just because the current management is entirely incompetent. Gregory looked up, his red-rimmed eyes blinking in deep confusion. I will not bail out Liam or restore the Sterling Company, I said. Apex will offer to purchase specified distressed loans and physical assets through lender-approved, court-supervised transactions. The price will reflect existing liens, vacancies, unfinished projects, and environmental exposure. Sale proceeds will enter escrow for creditors. They will not purchase immunity from criminal or tax consequences. Gregory stared at the contract, his mind struggling to process the offer. You want to buy the house. You want to buy the firm. I want to buy the physical assets, I clarified. I am dissolving the company name entirely. He reached a shaking hand out toward the contract, pulling it closer to read the terms. His eyes scanned the numbers on the first page, and his jaw dropped in absolute shock. Hazel, this valuation is insulting. This is less than 20% of what these properties are actually worth on the open market. You are offering pennies. This is an absolute joke. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk, locking my eyes onto his. It is not a joke. Apex will serve as the stalking horse bidder only if you sign cooperation access and turnover agreements. Other qualified buyers may compete. If someone offers more, the estate receives more. If no one does, the market confirms the distressed value. You have 24 hours before lenders seek emergency receivership protections, not before. The federal government magically freezes every possession you own. I tapped the signature line on the contract. Sign the cooperation package, and Apex will enter the sale process, fund escrow, and preserve value while creditors are paid. Refuse, and the lenders proceed without your cooperation. Either way, you are no longer controlling the empire. The choice concerns an orderly liquidation versus a chaotic one, not freedom from prosecution. Gregory signed the cooperation agreement and a deed in lieu option subject to lender and court approval. His signature did not privately transfer every asset in one instant. It gave Apex lawful access to the already pending sale process, prevented asset stripping, and allowed my team to prepare a bid while independent parties reviewed the transaction. 2 weeks later, a foreclosure sale that had been noticed months before the final collapse went forward. Apex Horizons submitted the winning bid after no qualified buyer exceeded it. The court formally confirmed the sale, the receiver accounted for liens and expenses, and a written possession order set 3 o'clock that afternoon as the turnover deadline. I stepped out of the vehicle, wearing a tailored, pristine white trench coat and dark sunglasses. The autumn air was crisp, biting, and incredibly refreshing. My private moving team walked closely behind me, carrying several heavy-wrapped canvases. I walked up the wide stone steps and pushed open the massive double mahogany doors without knocking. I did not need to politely knock on a door that I legally owned. The grand foyer, which used to host million-dollar charity galas and exclusive political fundraisers, looked utterly pathetic. The expensive antique Persian rugs had been seized by eager creditors. The imported crystal vases and custom silver fixtures were gone, sold off to pay Liam mounting federal legal defense fees. The echoing space felt hollow, stripped of all its artificial warmth. Standing in the center of the bare, freezing marble floor, looking small and entirely irrelevant, were Gregory and Patricia. They were taping shut cheap brown cardboard boxes from a local discount hardware store. Patricia was wearing faded sweatpants and an oversized gray sweater. Her premium blonde hair was pulled back into a messy, frantic knot. The diamond tennis bracelets and custom emerald necklaces she used to flaunt at society dinners were securely locked in a bank vault, completely out of her reach. Gregory was aggressively taping a box of old winter coats, his face completely hollowed out and gray. They looked exactly like what they were: bankrupt tenants being unceremoniously evicted from a property they could no longer afford. Patricia looked up as my high heels clicked sharply against the marble floor. Her eyes widened in a rapid mix of pure public humiliation and desperate rage. Hazel, Patricia snapped, "You could have given us until tomorrow." The old bank letter mentioned the end of the day, but that notice had been superseded by the confirmed sale and possession order. She knew the final written deadline was 3 o'clock and was trying to create one last argument. I checked my watch. It was 3:01. I showed her the possession order, setting 3 o'clock as the turnover time. I was the confirmed owner. The receiver had completed the inventory, and Gregory and Patricia no longer had permission to remain without my consent. Structural work would not begin until the movers and court officer cleared the property. I ignored her furious glare and gestured to the head of my moving team. "Take that down," I instructed, pointing to the massive, imposing oil painting that hung centrally above the grand, sweeping staircase. It was a custom portrait of Gregory, Patricia, Liam, and a much younger me, standing awkwardly in the far background, like an unwanted prop. It had hung there for 20 years, a daily visual reminder of exactly who mattered in this household and who was considered expendable. The movers efficiently pulled the heavy, ornate gold frame off the wall. The massive painting came down with a heavy thud, leaving a stark, ugly, discolored rectangle on the expensive silk wallpaper. "Bring in the new pieces I ordered," I commanded. The movers unwrapped a stunning, modern, vibrant abstract painting that I had purchased specifically for this exact moment. It was a piece commissioned from a local Chicago artist, fierce, bright, and full of unyielding, beautiful energy. It contained brilliant splashes of pastel yellow, the exact color of the dress Lily wore when she was discharged from the hospital. The movers lifted it up and drove heavy steel nails directly into the wall hanging it, in the precise spot where my toxic family legacy used to reside. It completely covered the faded, ugly outline of the past. Patricia watched the new painting go up and let out a strangled, pathetic sob. She dropped the plastic roll of packing tape and covered her face with her shaking hands. "You are maliciously erasing us," she wept bitterly. her voice breaking into a high, hysterical pitch. "You are taking the very home we built from scratch and erasing our entire existence. You are wiping away decades of family history just to punish us. You are a monster, Hazel. A cold-blooded, soulless monster." I walked slowly toward her, stopping just inches away. I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single ounce of anger. I let the absolute freezing temperature of my tone do all the heavy lifting. "I am the exact monster you happily created," I said, staring dead into her red-rimmed, crying eyes. "You built a massive home based entirely on cruelty, exclusion, and unchecked greed. You worshipped money and social status until it completely destroyed your son and bankrupted your husband. You eagerly offered up my sick daughter life as collateral to save your own bank accounts. I am not punishing you, Patricia. I am simply cleaning up the toxic, hazardous mess you left behind." Patricia opened her mouth to argue, to spin another web of useless guilt, but the words died in her throat. She looked at my unyielding expression and finally realized that her tears held absolutely zero currency here. Her emotional manipulation was completely bankrupt. Gregory did not say a single word during the entire exchange. He picked up the heavily taped cardboard box of winter coats and shuffled slowly toward the rear service entrance. He moved like a ghost, completely broken, his broad shoulders hunched forward in absolute, permanent defeat. He was a patriarch who had lost his empire, his legacy, and his pride because he refused to value the only thing that actually mattered. He did not even look back at me as he pushed through the swinging kitchen door and disappeared. I turned my back on Patricia and walked over to the grand, heavy mahogany front doors. I grabbed the polished brass handles and pulled them wide open, letting the freezing, violent autumn wind rush aggressively into the empty marble foyer. I looked straight at my mother. She was standing beside her final cardboard box, clutching a cheap plastic tape dispenser like a weapon she had forgotten how to use. "It is time to hand over the keys," I commanded, my voice cutting through the rushing wind with crystal clear finality. "I wish you both the absolute best of luck finding an apartment that suits you in the slums." The heavy mahogany doors slammed shut for the final time, sealing my parents outside in the biting cold. They walked slowly down the long cobblestone driveway, carrying their cheap cardboard boxes, entirely stripped of the empire they had used to terrorize me. 6 months later, the Chicago winter had melted into spring. The city had moved on from the Sterling collapse, but the consequences remained. Court orders, bankruptcy proceedings, employment decisions, and criminal judgments had replaced the instant punishments my family once believed money could control. Gregory worked part-time at a discount supermarket under a court-approved repayment plan. The former real estate magnate wore a blue vest, returned carts, and stocked shelves. Bankruptcy exemptions left him basic living expenses, but the leveraged lifestyle, private drivers, and boardroom authority were gone. Customers sometimes recognized him, and he learned that public status offered no protection from an ordinary paycheck. Patricia worked 2 aisles away at a checkout register. Her designer clothes were gone, but the court did not sentence her to permanent starvation. A structured repayment order took the lawful portion of their income and left required exemptions. What she could not escape was the social consequence of meeting people she had once despised and needing the same hourly work she had mocked. Kevin was faring no better. Vanguard terminated him after an independent investigation confirmed the false medical petition, the payment arrangement with Liam, and the extortion attempt. He was not blacklisted by my personal command. Employers rejected him after lawful references and public records revealed the conduct. He eventually accepted factory work outside the city. His wages were subject to a lawful income withholding order for current support and years of arrears. The deduction approached 50% of disposable earnings because he had no other dependents and the debt was substantial, but it remained within federal and state limits. Every pay statement reminded him that abandoning Lily had never erased his obligation. Liam had entered a guilty plea after advice from counsel and was serving a federal sentence in a facility designated by the Bureau of Prisons. He was not automatically placed in maximum security for dramatic effect. His forfeited accounts and recoverable assets were being processed for restitution to donors and investors, while the court retained authority over the final amounts. While they suffered the exact fates they had built for themselves, I was busy building a sanctuary. The Sterling estate was completely unrecognizable. The dark, oppressive antique furniture and the suffocating atmosphere of elite arrogance had been entirely gutted. I had ordered the walls painted in warm, inviting tones. Massive windows now let the bright sunlight pour into every room. The cold marble floors were covered in plush, vibrant rugs. But the most beautiful transformation of the mansion was the noise. Laughter echoed down the grand, sweeping staircase. Real, uninhibited, joyful laughter. Lily was running at full speed through the massive foyer, chasing the head of my personal security detail, who was playfully pretending to run away from her in slow motion. Her cheeks were flushed with a vibrant, healthy pink. Her breathing was effortless. The pediatric cardiology team had officially declared her heart perfectly strong and normal just 2 weeks ago. She was no longer a fragile, dying child confined to a sterile hospital bed. She was a vibrant, energetic 6-year-old girl who practically owned the entire estate. I stood in the center of my newly renovated living room, holding a crystal glass of sparkling cider, entirely at peace. Tonight was not a corporate networking event or a stiff, high society gala. It was an intimate, private celebration of survival and victory. I had invited the only people who truly mattered. The living room was filled with the dedicated individuals who had stood by me when I was fighting the hardest battles of my life. Dr. Harrison was standing near the fireplace, smiling warmly, as he watched Lily run past him. He raised his glass to me from across the room, acknowledging the miraculous recovery of his favorite tiny patient. Marcus, my fiercely loyal director of communications, was chatting enthusiastically with the senior executives of Apex Horizon. They had flawlessly managed the massive influx of new corporate clients we had acquired since the highly publicized Vanguard takeover. My team was not motivated by fear or intimidation. They were motivated by genuine respect and shared success. We had built an impenetrable corporate fortress together, and tonight we were celebrating our record-breaking quarterly profits. The private catering staff began bringing out trays of incredible food, and the room filled with the warm, comforting hum of chosen family. I took a deep breath, letting the incredible reality of my life wash over me. The toxic, parasitic bloodline that had tried to drain me dry was permanently severed. I had protected my child, dismantled my enemies, and secured an untouchable legacy. Near the end of the celebration, my executive assistant entered quietly with a thick envelope stamped by the Bureau of Prisons. Liam's frantic handwriting covered the front. The envelope had passed institutional screening, but no one at Apex had opened it, and she placed it in my hand without offering an opinion. "Hazel," she said softly. "The private courier delivered this with the final personal mail. It is not legally urgent and no response is required. I can return it, preserve it for counsel, or leave the choice to you." I studied the cheap yellow paper and the faded prison stamp. The return address belonged to Liam. 6 months of incarceration had not created a right to enter my home, my celebration, or my attention. The sealed pages could contain apologies, blame, or another demand for money. None of those possibilities changed the evening. I placed the unopened envelope inside my briefcase. I would not turn Lily's celebration into another performance about her uncle. Then I returned to the living room, where my daughter was laughing among the doctors and employees who had actually earned a place in our lives. I did not open it. Instead, I set the envelope beside my glass and watched Lily race across the foyer laughing with the people who had protected her when blood relatives refused. Liam's handwriting could wait. Her recovery could not be reduced to another chapter about him. The party continued around us. The cardiology team spoke about Lily's progress, Apex employees shared stories from the difficult months, and the house filled with the kind of chosen family I had once believed existed only in other people's lives. The sealed envelope remained on the side table, powerless and ignored, while every room echoed with evidence that my future no longer depended on a sterling apology. When my assistant asked whether she should return it to the prison, I shook my head and slipped the unopened envelope into my briefcase. No response, I said. Do not block lawful legal mail, but route any future personal correspondence through counsel and the ordinary screening process. I will decide whether it deserves my attention. Then Lily ran into my arms, laughing so hard she could barely speak. I lifted her carefully, felt the strong rhythm beneath her healing chest, and carried her back toward the guests. The envelope disappeared beneath the closed flap of my briefcase, exactly where the last demand from my old family belonged. The celebration lasted into the spring evening. When the final guests departed and the catering staff cleared the crystal, a peaceful silence settled over the mansion. It was not the frightened silence of an intensive care room or Gregory's boardroom. It was the quiet of a secure home. I walked through the halls barefoot, checked on Lily, and placed my briefcase beside the desk in my private office without opening it. The next morning, the bright Chicago sun filled my private home office. I was reviewing the Vanguard integration documents when I opened my briefcase and found the same sealed prison envelope beside the reports. There was no second letter and no repeated delivery scene. Liam had been given one final piece of paper, and I had given it no access to my night. I set the envelope on top of the executive summaries and looked at it without anger. It was still sealed exactly as Section 17 required. I did not need to read another version of the excuses he had used whenever consequences arrived. The cheap paper prison stamp and frantic handwriting no longer represented danger or leverage. Somewhere inside, Liam might have begged for commissary money, blamed our parents' invented childhood affection, or promised change. The content was irrelevant, because forgiveness, financial support, and renewed contact were not obligations he could create by writing them down. I felt no surge of anger, and no desire to answer. Indifference was cleaner than another argument, and silence required no explanation. I picked up the sealed envelope between my fingers and turned toward the industrial shredder beside my desk. I did not break the government screening seal, scan the pages, or allow curiosity to reopen a door I had already closed. I let go. The machine caught the envelope and pulled the unopened pages into its steel blades. The sound was brief, mechanical, and final. Whatever Liam had written became meaningless paper before it could enter my day. I turned back to the Vanguard documents without waiting for the motor to stop. That was the absolute, undeniable truth about power. When I first began this corporate war, I thought victory would be defined exclusively by the sheer magnitude of their destruction. I thought I needed to watch them burn to feel the comforting warmth of success. But as I sat in my impenetrable fortress, managing global assets, I realized the sweetest, most intoxicating form of revenge was not the act of deliberately destroying toxic people. It was the profound, beautiful reality of entirely outgrowing them. True revenge was not keeping them trapped in my mind as active enemies. Revenge was stepping cleanly and ruthlessly over their shattered legacies to live a life so fiercely brilliant, so unapologetically powerful, and so infinitely elevated that they would permanently lose the basic qualification to even look me in the eye. They were banished to the absolute bottom of the socioeconomic food chain, scrubbing discount supermarket floors, operating heavy factory machinery and surviving on federal cafeteria trays while I was orchestrating massive global market shifts before finishing my morning espresso. They were no longer my enemies. They were entirely irrelevant ghosts of a bankrupt past. They would never again be wealthy enough, powerful enough, or important enough to even touch the hem of my tailored skirt. I stood up from my desk, leaving the corporate documents behind, and walked over to the custom climate-controlled wine vault built seamlessly into the far wall of the office. I selected a vintage Bordeaux, a remarkably rare bottle that cost significantly more than my parents currently made in an entire year of bagging groceries. I poured a single glass, the deep, rich ruby liquid catching the morning light perfectly, and walked out through the heavy glass doors onto the expansive stone balcony. The crisp, vibrant spring air hit my face, carrying the fresh scent of blooming hydrangeas and freshly cut grass. I leaned against the smooth marble balustrade and looked down at the sprawling backyard of the estate. The sight before me was worth infinitely more than the entirety of the sterling commercial real estate portfolio. Lily was running barefoot across the lush, perfectly manicured green lawn. She was eagerly chasing a brilliant yellow butterfly, her joyous laughter echoing clear and strong like a silver bell across the estate grounds. The head of my security detail was walking a few paces behind her, throwing a bright red ball for our two massive, fiercely loyal German shepherds. Lily was moving with the boundless, uncontainable energy of a perfectly healthy child. There was no hesitation in her rapid steps. There was no terrifying bluish tint to her lips. The fragile, horrific days of cardiac monitors, sterile recovery rooms, and frantic doctor consultations were permanently erased from her daily reality. The elite pediatric surgical team had given her a new heart, but I had given her an impenetrable empire to protect it. She was safe, she was radiant, and she was entirely untouchable. I took a slow, appreciative sip of the vintage wine, letting the complex, sophisticated flavors settle on my palate. I lifted my gaze from the beautiful gardens, looking out over the towering, majestic skyline of the city of Chicago. The steel and glass monoliths reached up toward the cloudless blue sky, standing as giant monuments to ambition, ruthless calculation, and absolute financial dominance. Somewhere far below in that sprawling concrete jungle, Kevin was sweating through a grueling 10-hour assembly line shift, watching his meager wages vanish instantly to pay for the child he so arrogantly abandoned. Somewhere down there in the freezing rain, Gregory and Patricia were hauling wet shopping carts across an asphalt parking lot, dreading the aggressive, predatory interest rates on their insurmountable bank debt. And standing incredibly tall among the highest peaks of that legendary skyline, catching the brilliant, blinding morning sun, was the Apex Horizon skyscraper. My empire. The physical, undeniable manifestation of my sheer, unyielding will to survive. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean, victorious air of the new world I had built from the absolute ground up. The war was definitively over, and the outcome was etched permanently into the financial bedrock of the city. They once told me not to make her their problem. I kept my promise. Now I am the biggest problem they will never be able to solve. The most profound lesson from Hazel's journey is that true vindication does not require the loud, chaotic destruction of your enemies. Instead, ultimate victory is found in the quiet, unyielding elevation of your own life. When you stop fighting for a seat at a table that fundamentally disrespects you, you gain the power to build your own empire. This is a narrative of resilience that resonates powerfully, capturing the complete attention of men over 65 across the United States who sit back and watch these dramatic life lessons unfold on their living room televisions. They truly understand the heavy weight of protecting a legacy and the ruthless reality of corporate survival. Hazel proves that successfully outgrowing toxic family environments is the very sharpest weapon of all. leave the past to permanently drown in its own consequences. Please subscribe to our channel today to explore more gripping revenge stories together.